What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto returns 3 years late with a cloaked stranger and the two-tails Jinchuriki as his queen? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful crayon. On a worn dirt road not too far away from Konoha, two figures wearing grey hooded cloaks slowly walked towards the walls of the said village. Both were close to the same height, but it was easy to tell them apart as one was obvious female due to the cloak she was wearing was a little tight around her chest, revealing that she had somewhat large breasts. Her eyes were a deep emerald with dilated iris and a little off tilt to give them a slight animalistic look to them that was almost like that of a cat. There were a few strands of blonde hair over her tomboyish face. She also wore a Hite-8 on her forehead, but was difficult to tell what village she belonged to, but was obvious to see she was a Nukanin as there was a slash on her Hite-8. Seems like you are back home. The other nodded lightly at the girl's statement. The other was harder to tell until you got a good look at the face. The face was obviously male with tanned skin with 3 cleft whisker marks on each cheek. Another defining characteristic about him was his piercing electric ocean blue eyes that seemed to have lost some vibrancies in them. Just like the girl, he had a few strands of darker blonde hair covering his forehead, which also had a Hite-8 on his forehead, but it was easier to identify as it was Leaf, meaning he was from Konoha. Yeah, we're finally here. You sure you want to be here? I'll be alright. There is nothing we can do now, let's just hope everything goes smoothly. The girl interrupted him quickly, not wanting to give him the impression that she didn't want to be there. Truthfully, she didn't want to, but she would do so as it was his home and that was enough for her. Shaking her head of that thought, she walked besides her fellow blonde as they reached the entrance of the village and the guard stopped them. Halt, state your names and purpose here. The blonde-hair male looked over at the guard that had stopped them before tapping his forehead lightly to reveal his Hite-8 to the said man. The said man also was able to see the features of the young male's face and instantly recognized who he was. So you're back. Tsunade-sama is expecting you. But who is this and where is Jiraiya-sama? The young male sighed lightly as he heard Jiraiya's name before shaking his head lightly as he looked over the girl. She is with me and is here to see the Hokage. The guard Chunin looked at him with some doubt in his eyes, but looking into the piercing blue eyes that were colder than he remembered forced his hand as something was going on. Moving out of their way, both silently walked through the gate and headed for the tallest tower in the center of the village. In the said tallest tower in the village of Konoha, a woman with dusty blonde hair and 2 pigtails was growing agitated and quickly. And her problem wasn't the massive amount of paperwork on her desk, but the fact that neither her ex-teammate or her technically adopted grandson, baby brother, had not returned. Neither of her 2 apprentices could blame her as it had been 4 years since both of them had left and they were supposed to return after 2.5. They were also very worried about the 2 as they couldn't figure out why they had taken so long to return. Especially Sakura, as she was beginning to realize that she might had very well lost a second teammate and the thought was almost unbearable for her, so she put it on the back of her mind and did her best not to think about it. Even still, it was eating away at her not having the chance to make it up all the years of horrible treatment to the blonde. Sighing once more, Tsunade signed another paper automatically, much to the worry of both her apprentices as she hadn't even looked at the papers lately. If someone wanted to have her resign, all they would have to do is put a paper of her resignation on the top and she would sign it without second thought. Shaking her head lightly, Shizune walked silently over to Tsunade before placing her hand on her shoulder, making the large-breast Hokage jump lightly as she looked up at her. Shizune refrained from sighing as she looked down at her master. Tsunade-sama, if you don't feel like working today, you don't have to. Both Sakura and I can handle this. Go ahead and... Before she could finish, the door opened to reveal both Kaharu and Homura. Shizune refrained from growling along with Sakura as both were trying to get Tsunade to rest as there was no doubt the Gondem Hokage was extremely tired. Neither of them noticed this, but did notice the killing intent they were releasing towards them. They easily threw it off as they walked up to the desk as they had been exposed to greater killing intents. Tsunade sighed deeply as she knew why they had come this time and really didn't want Sakura or Shizune to be here for it. Looking over at them, she had half a mind to tell them to leave but didn't get the opportunity to do so as Homura spoke up. Tsunade, it has been 1.5 years since Jiraiya should have returned along with him. Tsunade refrained from clenching her fist and sending the man through the wall as she knew it wouldn't look very good for her to punch an old man that was 30 years older than she was. Kaharu noticed the twitching in Tsunade's face and body and quickly took over as Homura really didn't like Naruto. Tsunade-san, I know you want to wait for more time believing that Jiraiya will return with him, but something could have happened. I'm not saying to mark him as a Nukenin like Homura is here. I'm just saying to send a group to search for them. And before you say we have a shortage of shinobi, I'm well aware of that fact. But you can spare a few to search for them. Nodding lightly at her, Tsunade sighed as she knew it was the truth. In fact, she had been sending a few to search for them, but no one could find a trace of them. She absently cursed Jiraiya for not giving her at least a schedule on where they would be. Shaking her head lightly, she sighed as she looked over at Kaharu while ignoring the fuming Homura, though he stopped when all four kunoichi glared at him. But I haven't been able to send any Junin or Anbu to look for them. I was thinking about sending Kakashi to look for them, but he's been out on missions too often. Kaharu nodded lightly as she understood that reason before coming up with a plan of her own. Why not send a few of our new Chunin along with some of his friends? Most of them are given mediocre tasks anyways, so it shouldn't be a problem to send them. I've thought about it, but you know Jiraiya as well as I do, and when he said 2 to 3 years I had a feeling it would take longer. I still want to believe they ran into something important and forgot to send a message to me. It wouldn't be surprising considering the two of them. But you are right, it needs to be done soon. Tsunade answered quickly as she had honestly thought about doing that and was thinking about it more seriously than before as it was taking way too long for them to arrive. Kaharu could only nod, knowing Jiraiya all too well along with his pervert hobbies and his habit of being chronically late. But she also knew that Jiraiya wouldn't have been this late without contacting someone. So she was slightly concerned for her son. It wasn't very well known, but she was the Toad Hermit's mother and had requested that Sarutobi be his sensei as she knew he would be the perfect one for him. Though she distanced herself from him later in her life, they still had a decent mother-son relationship. I know, but I would still like to see a larger search for them. Maybe using the Inazuku along with the Aburame heirs. This would be an excellent warm-up mission since I know you have picked both of them for the Uchiha's retrieval when Uzumaki-san is back. Tsunade could only sigh lightly at Kaharu, knowing why she was so persistent. Seeing that she wasn't going to be giving up anytime soon as she was worried about both of them as well, she was about to cave in when there was a knock on the door. Sitting straight up in her chair as the door opened, Katetsu popped his head in with a blank, yet somewhat relieved face. Tsunade-sama, Uzumaki-san has finally arrived along with another. Everyone, except Homura, looked extremely relieved at this as Tsunade motioned for the Chunin to bring him in along, with who she probably thought was Jiraiya. She was mildly surprised when two cloaked figures entered the room and she instantly knew that Jiraiya wasn't one of them as one was definitely female. She wouldn't have put it past Naruto to be in his no-jutsu form, but she knew the other wasn't Jiraiya as he wasn't tall enough and was around the height Jiraiya reported Naruto to be at in his last letter, if not a little taller. Sitting up even straighter than before, she looked at the one she believed, and knew was Naruto. Naruto, what's going on? Who is this and where is Jiraiya? Both cloaked figures flinched very slightly that only Kaharu, Homura and Tsunade could notice it. Sighing lightly, Naruto slowly slid his hood down to reveal his electric blue eyes. At first, everyone was slightly surprised as his eyes didn't hold the vibrancies they once did and his face seemed to be hardened compared to the happy-go-lucky face he had 4 years ago. They quickly adjusted to it as they knew something had to happen to have acting like this. I'll explain everything, Ba-chan, but I need to get some things out of the way first. Sorry for not sending any messages as when we headed back the conditions were rather hellish with the Akatsuki and all. But I'm back, and to answer your second question, this my fiancé, Ni Yugito. Everyone's eyes widened hearing what Naruto had said and flinched lightly at the Akatsuki and hellish part. Once he was finished, all eyes slowly turned to the girl in the room. Seeing that he had introduced her to them and they were all looking at her in shock, the girl slowly slid of her hood to reveal her slightly feral, cat-like face and slashed Kumogakure Hite 8. At first sight of her face, Sakura was slightly jealous as the girl seemed to have a natural beauty to her, but quickly put that aside as she had heard Naruto saying that she was his fiancé and was very interested, as was mostly everyone in the room, on how it happened. The only two that didn't were Homura, as he disliked Naruto, and Koharu, as she wanted to know about her son first. Tsunade quickly overcame her shock at what Naruto's head as she noticed the Hite ate as well. Naruto, as much as I want to know what happened, I need to know where Jiraiya is. Naruto flinched once more as he heard Jiraiya's name as she said that, along with Yugito looking down in shame. Seeing their reactions, both Tsunade and Koharu felt their stomachs turn as they knew something had happened and it wasn't good. And seeing that Naruto was trying to find a way to say what they felt made their stomachs turn even worse than before. Taking a deep breath as Yugito walked beside him, Naruto looked Tsunade directly in the eyes as he spoke in an almost emotionless voice as he kept his emotions from surfacing. Jiraiya-sensei is dead. The room dropped several degrees as silence followed, with Naruto's words hitting everyone like a ton of bricks. Everyone was the same as the loss of possibly one of the greatest shinobi the village had the privilege of being witness to had finally moved on. But two in the room were at a loss for words. Tsunade couldn't believe it. Jiraiya, the strongest in the village, including herself as she wasn't arrogant and knew that Jiraiya could beat her if it came down to it, was dead. The pervert that would hit on her, even after losing both Nawaki and Dan. It wasn't that he was being insensitive, it was just the only way he knew how to try and cheer Tsunade up. The same man that had single-handedly kept them in the Iwakuna War when the Yondaime was trying to invent the jutsu that would bring the war to an end and be feared by every nation to this day. He had finally met his match and was unable to do what he did best, to find a way to succeed against overwhelming and almost impossible odds. Which was a trait he oddly searched for in his apprentices, seeing that he only took two, which happened to be the Yondaime and Naruto. Just like Tsunade, Koharu was in complete shock to learn that her son was no longer among the living. Sure, she disliked what he had become, but that was because he was a pervert and let his perverted ways take over his life. But looking past the perverseness, she felt great pride for him as he was a great shinobi and never once gave up in what he believed. To hear that he was dead and that he had died before she did was heartbreaking, but it was the way the life of a shinobi worked. All she could do was ask to hear how he died. How did it? Naruto once again flinched at what the elder said, having a slight idea who she was to Jiraiya. Sighing lightly, he turned to Yugito, who nodded lightly at him, before turning towards her. I would like to tell you he died doing what he loved most. But dying being pummeled by dozens of women wearing towels was something that wasn't going to happen for him. But before I can tell you how he died, both Yugito and I need to explain the events happening up to it. Seeing everyone nod lightly and look towards both of them as Yugito was giving him a slightly dirty look, not wanting to have to explain her part in what happened. Shaking her look off, Naruto sighed as he began to explain. Well, it began when both Sensei and I were allowed into Kumogakure for a week as they were trying to learn more of Akatsuki. We ended up in the Kumogakure after the Raikage called us in, as they had two Jinchuriki like myself. While everyone in the room knew of Naruto's status, each was quite surprised to see how openly he had admitted he was one, not knowing that Sakura knew he held Kyuubi. Anyways, we graded the threats they were in, and after a little fight with Yugi-chan here, I had my ass handed to me. At this, Yugito rolled her eyes at him before quickly picking up where he left off. Only because Jiraiya-sama stopped the fight and you're going to bore them with details that are unnecessary. They want facts, not a story. They'll learn the rest on their own time. Naruto could only shrug as he was a better storyteller and would just go on and on for a while. Anyways, picking where he left off, they stayed in our village for about 2.5 weeks and Naruto got to know Kurabi and I better. Just as they were leaving, the Raikage issued a mission to Kurabi and me along with a few Anbu. To kill Naruto and Jiraiya. Hearing this, everyone's attention began to lift, knowing it was getting to the part where everything was about to get interesting when Naruto pitched in. And being as we shinobi are nothing but weapons, they carried out their mission. But when they got there, Yugi-chan warned both of us what was going to happen. During the time I stayed there, we fell for each other and she couldn't let this happen. So thanks to her information, we were able to dispatch the Anbu easily. Kurabi was a different story. We had no idea of the powers of the eight-tail. All in the room were quiet as Naruto stopped, unable to take their attention of them even if a fly flew right in front of their face. Yugito sighed as she rubbed her wrist lightly. The said hand looked rather withered, but she seemed to ignore it as she looked straight into the eyes of the Gondem Hokage before she sighed deeply. Kurabi was unstoppable, even for Jiraiya-sama. Both Naruto and I were holding a mock battle with our Biju's powers, hoping that Jiraiya could quail him, but we were wrong. He called out 6 tails, and with his training from 2 different Raikages and brother to another, it was obvious he was superior to him. Jiraiya-sama didn't last 5 minutes before the fatal wound was given. Naruto interrupted as his eyes darkened to a point where it looked as if clouds had settled in. This caught everyone off guard, but not as much as the chakra that seemed to be radiating off of the teen. It was far more than what they anticipated as he stood by Yugito's side. Afterwards, I fought Kurabi and defeated him using my father's personal technique. The very same that ended the war with Iwagakure. Soon as he said that, all eyes widened in the room, knowing what the jutsu he was speaking of was, and Tsunade spoke out in disbelief for all of them. You know it? You know the Hiraishin? Naruto confirmation was only a small nod. That small nod had sent a shiver down Hamaru's spine as the others looked awestruck. As they slowly recovered, Tsunade motioned for Naruto to continue, but with a small twinkle in her eye as she refrained from showing her pride. Picking up where you left off, Naruto continued with the story, with Yugito still rubbing her wrist. Soon after Jiraiya's last words, we headed back here as that was one of his last wishes as well. But it turned out to be far more difficult than I expected, as I ran into Itachi and Kisame again and defeated them, only killing the latter. Itachi instead came with us, wanting to carry out the final part of his mission. He could see the widening of both Hamaru's and Kaharu's eyes, but said nothing as Tsunade looked in confusion but had caught the eyes of both the elders. He took us into hiding as we evaded the Akatsuki coming after us with everyone they had to spare. Apparently they were afraid that I knew the Hiraishin and wanted to take me down right then and there. Itachi, knowing this, had the only other person in the Akatsuki he could trust to help us, a blue-haired woman known as Konan. The 4 of us realized that there was little chance of succeeding in any attempt, so we did it in my classic style. Head on. Strangely enough, it worked as they weren't expecting it. With Konan and Itachi opening the sealed passageway of the base for us, we stormed their secret base and attacked. I was able to wipe out the money-grubbed Kakuzu and the puppet master Sasori as Itachi completely incinerated the immortal Hidan with his Amaterasu. Yugito was able to catch Deidara by surprise as Konan backstabbed her husband, Pain, and killed him quietly without us having to worry about him. Zetsu wasn't much of a problem as he fled the scene, but the final one was. Tobi, better known as Uchiha Madara, one of the founding fathers of Konoha. Only he believes Konoha to have betrayed him, and in a sense it did from the story he told us. In the battle, Itachi and Konan both fell to him as we were unable to find a way to even scratch the Uchiha. All hope seemed lost as not even the Hiraishin was fast enough to harm him. Naruto continued as he gripped his fist tightly, continuing to rub her wrist as if it was bothering her. Yugito looked up and continued surprising the others as Naruto had pretty much taken over. It wasn't until he had started the extraction on me as he continued battling Naruto when we found a way to take him down. The shackle he put my hand had kept me still for the extraction, but he didn't pin me down or knock me out thanks to Naruto. I found out that I couldn't break it no matter what I did, so I cut off my hand. Everyone other than Naruto and Yugito looked queasy at the thought. Sakura was actually the only one that had puked luckily enough into the garbage. The others knew her reasoning behind it. For survival, a lost limb meant nothing if you lived. Sighing as she continued rubbing her wrist, she looked over at Naruto, who nodded in return and continued on for her. With her lost limb, she grabbed the key for it and opened the shackle as I pushed him in that direction. Latching it onto him, he was unable to use his fading technique anymore, and I was able to kill him once and for all. After the battle and before returning here, we both used Nibi's and Kyuubi's chakra to reattach Yugi-chan's hand, but even still it doesn't work the way it is supposed to. Without even thinking, Tsunade was out of her chair, and besides a rather frightened Yugito as she looked over the hand. She cast a diagnostic jutsu and was slightly surprised at what she saw before shaking her head lightly. I see. I will have to research and see if there is a way to completely heal it. The only reason it is still alive is that blood is still flowing through it through some pretty bad veins. Sighing to herself as she turned to Naruto, Naruto was in a state of shock as she wrapped him into a hug. His head dug into her cleavage before she started shaking him violently. And goddamn you, knucklehead. You should have sent a message to me. We would have sent help. And don't even use the excuse you were in hiding. The damn Uchiha could have found a way to get it to us." Seeing that Naruto was turning into mush in her hands, she stopped shaking him as he slowly stumbled around in the room before walking into the wall and falling flat on his face. Tsunade snickered lightly as Naruto shook his head as he slowly stood up before walking to Koharu and pulling out a scroll and handing it to her. "Sensei said to give that to you, ma'am. He said you would want to read what is in there." Koharu could only smile lightly at the boy as a tear threatened to fall from her eye. Holding it back as she wiped it away, she slowly took the scroll from him as she nodded shakily. While she was happy that the boy was taking everything so well, she was fighting back her emotions. She knew it was hurting him as well, but his years of pain had taught him how to deal with it, but it was nothing could deal with losing your own son. Diligently opening the scroll, using her years of dealing with paperwork, she quickly read through it before dropping it in shock. Her eyes watered and tears were dripping from the corners before she instantly hugged the boy in front of her, much to the surprise of all in the room as she whispered words that were not heard by anyone other than a certain blonde cat, who looked strangely yet knowingly at the two. As everyone recovered as the two separated, Koharu wiped her tears away before a stern look crossed her face as she marched up to a sweating Hokage, having a slight idea of what this was about. "Tsunade, why did you never tell me that you and my son had a child? Not only that, why did any of you fail to mention to me that he had my great-grandson and was allowed to go through all the shit he had to go through?" Tsunade flinched at the volume of her voice and was quickly beginning on finding an escape. Why did she have to be the one stuck with this and not the damn pervert probably laughing at her in his grave? If he was going to die a second time when she made it to the afterlife. Actually, she was going to kill him anyways, so that just gave her more reason to. We didn't want anyone to know who Minato belonged to. If anyone at the time had known that he was our child, the best assassins in the land would have been sent to kill him. We did the only thing we could do and put him in the orphanage with Sarutobi's help. Naruto was for much of the same reasons, except with Kyuubi there was the risk of awakening Kyuubi too early and other villages seeking to capture him and use the fox's power against us. If he had been awakened before he was 12. Her Ba-chan. Kyuubi is a she. Naruto interjected as a loud ringing sound sounded through his mind while he held his ears tightly. She is wanting me to tell you this because she is not a goddamn guy and is tired of everyone thinking she is. Damn right I am. The said fox interjected as well as she ran around in her cage, pissed at being called a guy again. In a cage not too far away, a two-tailed cat rolled his eyes while mumbling about a hot-headed wife. Everyone in the room twitched, but seeing that Naruto was holding his ears in pain as his eyes were becoming dazed, they decided not to do anything as the fox was currently throwing a temper tantrum. Shaking her head, Koharu quickly turned back at Tsunade with narrowed eyes. "I know what would have happened, Tsunade. I'm not as senile as Sarutobi was and I know a small amount of the blame goes on him when it comes to Naruto. But I would have liked to have known about Minato. Hell, if I knew everything I did now back then I wouldn't have interfered seeing how well he grew up. The same with Naruto, but I would have liked to help with everything. Not be kept in the dark." Tsunade winced at the tone of her voice. She had a point, but she, Jiraiya and Sarutobi had kept a promise not to tell anyone in fear of the information leaking and getting to people that would have spread it around. "I know, but I am sorry. It was for the best. In Naruto's case I'm still pissed at the lack of what Sensei had done. If I was here I would have guaranteed that Naruto would have been well looked after, but I was never here. After all, it does take a lot out of you losing a son and an entire family." Tsunade at the end looked Koharu in the eyes. Surprisingly enough, Koharu backed off as she knew exactly what Tsunade was hinting at. Naruto on the other hand had narrowed his eyes hearing this and didn't waste a second as he walked straight to Tsunade with his eyes blazing and spoke in an angry yet powerful voice. "What do you mean lost an entire family? I'm still here, you old hag. Out of all the people my father and the Sandame would tell, you would be on the top of the list that I was your grandson." Both Sakura and Shizune gasped in surprise at what Naruto had said and the volume of his voice while Homura narrowed his eyes and quickly left the room to inform the council what he had learned. They would need to hear this. This didn't go unnoticed by Koharu, but she stayed behind wanting to hear the rest of what happened. To their surprise, Tsunade looked Naruto in the eyes, having to look up a little as he was a few inches taller and spoke in a quiet yet equally powerful voice. "I never knew, Naruto. I was left in the dark about your existence. If I had known in the slightest that you were indeed my grandson, do you honestly think you would have grown up in Konoha seeing what your life was like? Naruto shrunk back at her words at the end, realizing his mistake. He would have thought that one or the other would have told her, but apparently neither did, which was the reason why Tsunade was lashing out on him. Answering her question, he shook his head, allowing Tsunade to continue. You're right, I wouldn't have. I would have taken you with me and probably never returned to this village, as it was you that brought me back. I was told the night when you found us, when I was told that you existed. Jiraiya was out cold for the rest of the night and the next day, and that was why he wasn't helping you those 2 nights. Now, do I make myself clear? He could only nod, as the killing intent she was radiating was far stronger than he had anticipated. But in an instant, it all went away as he was wrapped up into a tight hug by the Gondem, who had a tear rolling from her eye as old memories resurfaced. Knowing that the rest of the day was pretty much screwed, seeing that Homura was gone, she let him go before turning to Shizune. Shizune, I need you to look up the records that medics attempted to reattach a severed limb. Sakura, retrieve Asuma's, Kurenai's and Guy's team and tell them to meet in this office at 5 sharp. Also, tell Kakashi to come as well and not to be late, otherwise there will be a swift and brutal punishment. Naruto, you and your fiancé are to come with us to the council chambers. With a quick yes, both Sakura and Shizune left the room. Yugito on the other hand shrunk back at this, as council meetings were never good things when she was back home and only led to her misery. Sensing this, Kaharu was actually the first to her side to reassure her and Naruto, seeing that he didn't like the council as well as he was Sarutobi's ward. Don't worry, child, nothing bad will happen. Yugito still wasn't convinced, but with Naruto wrapping his hand around her waist she felt a little more comfortable and nodded as Tsunade led the way. Leaning against him and laying her head on his shoulder, she whispered lightly into his ear so no one else could hear her. Naruto, I don't like this. Other villages don't accept Nukenans very often unless they have something of worth to them. And I know the Hyuga have at least 1 seat here, and I know the Cloud is very sore about the incident back then, and the feeling is probably mutual. And, you worried too much, love. Naruto interrupted her, which in turn gained her full attention as she looked up at him. Shaking his head as he held her closer to him, he smiled as he kissed her on the nose before whispering back to her in a caring tone. 1. Konoha has the highest acceptance rating of other villages, as we are a little more lenient on those that come here. 2. While they don't have much to gain, they do stand to lose a lot. Mainly me and what I know. 3. Sure, the Hyuga have a seat, but they only hold 1. There are, I believe, 14 other seats, including the Hokage and elders. And finally, well, there are some still sore about what happened between Kumo and the Hyuga. One of my friends lost his father because of it, so he has the right to be bitter about it. But even if that sways some of their votes, there's still over many other members to win over. After he finished, Yugito smiled lightly as she closed her eyes and allowed him to guide her. He was always willing to do whatever was best for her first, and if he had confidence things would go their way, she would too. Getting a small shake from him, she opened her eyes as they reached the door. Slipping out of his grasp, she followed Naruto and Tsunade in as Kaharu walked over to her seat. Homura, who was standing in front of the council, quickly sat beside her as the rest of the council looked at the Gondem Hokage, only to see her glaring straight at the old man and cracked her knuckles in a dangerous manner. So, what did the late Homura tell all of you? As Homura paled, knowing what Tsunade could do to him, the rest of the council looked on. The first to speak was an older version of Shikamaru, except with a scar over his right eye and a tanner skin, who seemed to be grinning as he noticed the look the Hokage was giving the old man. He hadn't gotten too far, Tsunade-sama. I almost stopped listening to him after he kept disrespecting the Yondaime's will and the Sandame's law by saying Naruto was back. I believe he was trying to paint it in a bad picture like a lot of the villagers do, but you came just in time. Tsunade smirked as she looked over at Shikaku and nodded at him. Secretly she was planning on giving the man a raise, as he had just earned it in her mind. Thank you, Shikaku. Seeing that he didn't get too far into the details, I will explain what has happened. As you all can see, Naruto has indeed returned, but without Jiraiya. The reason being, that he is dead. The silence in the room was deafening to all those that heard it as tear escaped Kaharu's left eye. Looking at each and every member of the council, Tsunade was counting on who all would agree when it came time to vote and liked her odds, so she continued. Jiraiya died in the Cloud Country after the Raikage sent a group to kill him and Naruto. Now the two of them being there the weeks beforehand, they were warned of the attack by the girl standing besides Naruto. But even then, one of the assassins was far too powerful for Jiraiya to handle and he met his end at his hands. In retaliation, Naruto used a jutsu that only one person before has ever used to slay Jiraiya's killer. The Hiraishin. Hearing everyone besides those who knew gasp and paled, Tsunade smirked as she looked over at the young boy before turning her vision back upon the council. Another council member made his presence known as he looked over at Naruto before speaking in a nonchalant tone. Tsunade, it is customary for the shinobi returning to tell us. Not when it has already been explained to me personally and when the events have drastically changed one's outlook of life, Ryo. Tsunade answered with her eyes glaring daggers at the man before looking at the rest of the council, daring any of them to challenge her. Seeing that none were going to do so, she continued. As I was saying, following Jiraiya's last words, Naruto was returning to the village with the informant of the attack, Miss Nihir, when the Akatsuki ambushed them, one being Uchiha Itachi. This time around, Naruto defeated them, killing the other member while sparing the rogue Uchiha as he had one last mission, given to him by our own elders it appears. Once again both Kaharu's and Homura's eyes widened but this time along with the one-armed man known as Danzo. Tsunade narrowed her eyes at this knowing all three to be the ones that called the shot as Sarutobi would never do something so drastic, but had a slight suspicion as to why. I will want to talk to you three about that later. To continue, Itachi took both into hiding before contacting the only other person he could trust. A woman from within the Akatsuki and if I heard the name correctly, a former orphan, student of Jiraiya's. Having no choice as their options were limited, we attacked the Akatsuki's headquarters head-on after both Itachi and Konan snuck us in. Naruto interrupted Tsunade which earned him a stern glare from the Hokage, but he seemingly ignored as he continued on. The fight against the majority of the members was quick as it was almost an ambush and with our combined strengths they fell quickly. After both Yugito and I took out what we believed to be all the Akatsuki, the true leader showed up. A man that grew up and battled with the Shodem Hokage on many occasions and won half of their bouts except for the most important one of all. The battle at the Valley of the End. Uchiha Madara was alive until that day and was the reason Kyuubi attacked us 15 years ago. All in the council members were chilled to the bone to hear this. Even the ones that truly believed Naruto Kyuubi and thought that he was making this up. But even then, it was brought to their attention not but this last year of what the Sharingan could truly do and knew the story had some credit to it. But to think that Madara survived all this time was bordering ludicrous and the only person on the council that truly looked like most of this didn't affect him spoke with his pupil-less lavender eyes looking straight at Naruto. Boy, do you know how ridiculous that is? No one his age could live for that long and still be combat-worthy. It is physically impossible as both Homura and Kaharu can attest to that and even the late Sandame's skills were diminished compared to what they once were. Not being fazed at the Hyuga's comments as a lot of the shinobi in the room nodded as it was a little far-fetched. Naruto looked straight into Hiashi's eyes as he answered. Believe me, all of you. The Sharingan has far more power than ever thought imaginable. There are stages not even recorded in their black book beneath the headhouse's basement. You have the 3 regular stages then the Mangekyo which is the level Itachi had reached, which you all probably know requires either killing your best friend or killing another Mangekyo user as he explained to me. But Madara reached a level by doing something more drastic. You see, back when the clans were all fighting amongst each other before the villages were created both the Senju and the Uchiha clans rivaled each other and were constantly fighting with each other. The major turning point was when 2 young brothers of the Uchiha clan both activated the Mangekyo, one being Madara. Before then, the Uchihas were fading slowly as the Senju were becoming more powerful but with them they conquered almost every other clan. But because of his constant use of the Mangekyo, Madara was slowly becoming blind. He had tried everything but nothing seemed to work. In a desperate move to regain his sight, he took his brother's eyes and implanted them into him. When he did that, power like nothing else flooded his body giving him 3 jutsu beyond almost anything this world has seen. The first and most dangerous of the three was the ability to affect the spacetime continuum, much like that of my father's Hiraishin, except it wasn't nearly as fast but could travel to almost anywhere he had ever been. And he had such control over the technique that he could bend the time it took to work and could phase to the same exact spot to make it seem that he turned into a ghost. He used it to make it almost impossible for him to be even touched, even when I used the Hiraishin against him. The next ability wasn't as bothersome, but was far more useful as it controlled a being with far more power than anyone could hope to reach. Kyuubi no Kitsune. While the Mangekyu could tame it, it wasn't able to control it, so its usefulness was minimal at best. And finally, his last technique was instant regeneration, the ability to regenerate from any wound in an instant. Even if he was fatally wounded, he could recover from it unless the wound was instant death. That is where his phasing technique came in handy. It made it where it was almost physically impossible to land an instant death blow on him. The only downfall was that he could never age from the technique, as it halted his cells aging as it was constantly regenerating them, making them younger and younger. In truth, Madara would have eventually died due to reverse aging, as he was my age if not a little older. The only reason I know this much is that Madara himself told me during his battle, as he was quite sure he was going to win. Naruto finished his explanation as he had looked every member of the council in the eye, including Tsunade. Each of them were gaping at what Naruto had said. None could believe the Sharingan could have such power, and each made plans in their minds either to retrieve Sasuke or to eliminate the threat of having to deal with such great power again, as such a threat could bring down Konoha. Sensing this, Naruto quickly put a stop to it. Speaking in an almost emotionless voice, he began sending chakra to his eyes as he spoke slowly to add on to the effect. There is no need to worry of Sasuke acquiring such power and becoming a substantial threat to the village. Itachi asked me before the battle to remove his eyes if he did not make it. I had lost an eye in the battle and my other was badly damaged from my last attack. And both were transplanted into me. In an instant that horrified almost every person in the room, as his dark blue eyes turned red and 3 spinning tomos swirled around the pupil before fading back into their original color. As everyone was too shocked to say anything as Naruto had Itachi's Sharingan, Yugito stepped forward next to Naruto. While she seemed to be uneasy and anxious, she continued for him as he inched closer to her. What Naruto didn't mention was that in the battle against Madara, both Itachi and Konan had fallen to Madara in 3 attacks and had trapped me to extract my demon with a chakra diffusioning cuff. I severed my own hand to free myself from it before unlocking it, and on mere chance caught Madara's wrist with it, keeping him from using any of his abilities. After Naruto destroyed him with his double-edged technique, I removed Itachi's eyes, seeing what happened to Naruto, and implanted them into his and let Kyuubi handle the attaching them, as I have no medical abilities. Naruto nodded at her as he closed his eyes before opening them as he finished the rest of the story, but kept a firm eye on Yugito as he noticed her anxiousness. As soon as the fox had finished with the healing, we burned all the bodies including the heads, as we wanted nothing to do with it or their bounties. We attempted to reattach her hand and temporarily succeed, but knew that a true medic would have to take a look at it. Knowing that Tsunade was here and that I was late, we headed here hoping for at the minimum of her restoring her wrist. But head this here and now, whatever your decision of her status is, I will not let you harm my fiancé, even if it means I have to kill every single person here. And if she is not to stay here, I will leave with her, taking all the knowledge I know along with the Hiraishin. At the end his eyes had reactivated and had morphed into the Mangekyu as he looked at every single person in the room in the eyes besides the girl he was defending. While a good few were impressed that Naruto would go so far to protect the girl, even though they were still trying to absorb everything the two had just said along with the Hokage, the rest narrowed their eyes at the blonde. The first to speak for them was the creator of Roots as he looked at Naruto with his one visible eye. Is that a threat, boy? You better believe it is. I don't bluff when those I care about are in any danger. Naruto answered in a low whisper, but was still heard by everyone as if he had been speaking regularly. And the tone of his voice promised swift and quick reaction as the tri-bladed pupils began to swirl. Danzo narrowed his eyes as he motioned for a few of the Anbu corners to be on guard when all 3 walked up and stood besides the Hokage. The one in a fish-like mask whispered into Tsunade's ear and her face turned deadly serious as her vision locked on Danzo. Thank you, Dolphin. I will have a chat with him later. The said bandaged man paled as the 3 Anbu stood where they were. all three wearing the cream-colored cloaks signifying they were captains. Recognizing the voice of the dolphin-masked Anbu, Naruto kept his mouth shut as he tried to figure out what had driven him to become an Anbu and to become a captain so quickly. Tsunade shook her head as she looked at Naruto, still surprised at the fact that he now had the Sharingan and Mangekyo. At that, she turned his vision back to the council quickly. Now everything has been said and the stakes and consequences have been placed. I would like to have a vote on allowing young Miss Ni here become a shinobi of Konoha. Will all those that are for her instatement please stand? Those who are not stay seated. Out of the 14 that were seated as Tsunade counted as the 15th, 8 stood up, leaving only Danzo, Hiyashi, Homura, Ryo and 2 other council members seated. The ones that were standing not counting Tsunade were Shuza, Inoichi, Kaharu, Shibi, Shukuku, Sume and a woman with pink hair that reminded him a lot of Sakura. Seeing that all had casted their votes, a small smirk graced Tsunade's lips as her vote kept it from being a split decision, spoke with a little joy in her voice. Then it is decided on a 9-6 vote that Ni Yugito is to become a full-time chunin of Konoha after the standard year probation. Now you may be seated as I have another decision to inform you of. As all that sat down, Tsunade's smirk could be seen a mile away as she gave Naruto a quick look. I have decided that Naruto is to go by his real name of Namikaze Naruto and is promoted to the rank of Junin due to his feats. While a little less than a third of the council members looked displeased at this, the rest were either non-caring or slightly appeased hearing this before she continued with her sly smirk still on her face. After much talk with many of you in this room along with some of the more respected shinobi of our village, I have decided on a successor. I have 2 possible candidates, Rokudame Hokage, but as it is tradition I have to name 2 possible successors. The first and my personal choice, my grandson Namikaze Naruto. And shut up or all have you executed. She finished at the end as 5 council members that voted against Yugito attempted to say something. The only one that did not argue was Hiyashi, as he had no quarrels with Naruto taking the job. Seeing that she was grateful that he hadn't, she took another deep breath as the 5 were saying nothing due to the killing intent that had radiated off the Hokage only seconds ago. Once she was in control of her emotions, she returned closer to normal as she continued. As I is saying, Naruto is my first and more likely successor. But as there is always 2 that are considered, just as I was with Jiraiya, Minato with Orochimaru, Sarutobi with Danzo and my granduncles with Madara, Naruto has his rival. I have named Nara Shikamaru as the second possible successor. Seeing that no one was complaining about her second choice, she sighed lightly before finishing up. Alright then, you all are dismissed. Elders, I would like to see you tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. If not, well, let's just say Ibiki will be having a load of fun. All 3 of them paled, knowing what she was going to be asking them as Itachi's mission had been brought to light. They all disappeared quickly except for the dolphin-masked Anbu that Naruto turned to with a smile on his face, but keeping a good look on the younger blonde female as her mood seemed to slowly changing. This was bothering him and he knew something was going to happen, but he didn't want the others to overreact, so he continued to act normally. Hey Ruka-sensei, when did you get into Anbu and how did you become a captain so quickly? The said dolphin-masked Anbu shook his head at Naruto as he smiled underneath his mask. Sorry Naruto, I'll have to explain it to you later when I'm not on duty. I have. Iruka, you have the rest of the day off. Tsunade spoke as she looked at Iruka and Naruto with a devious smile. Iruka's face faltered as he could tell she did that on purpose, but she shook her head as she continued. But he will have to tell you later Naruto. All of us are heading back to my office as it is almost 5 and you 2 are going to have to be a part of this meeting. I'm very sure it involves you 2 and your plans. Both Naruto's and Yugito's blood stopped hearing this and they began to contemplate on fleeing the village with Hiraishin as they had not planned on anything beyond being together. But neither got the underlying meaning of her words, which in turn got Tsunade's attention as it was if they did not know. She narrowed her eyes as she planned to ask them about that after the meeting instead of bringing it up during, as she was going to announce a baby shower. Quickly shaking her head, she placed her hands on their shoulders and in 2 swirls of leaves, the 4 were at the office with the room packed with everyone Sakura went to retrieve. Everyone's eyes widened seeing Naruto back along with the ex-Kumo shinobi but said nothing as Tsunade had put on a serious face once more as she pulled out a Junin vest and a Chunin vest with a Konoha Hite 8 and handed them to Naruto and Yugito respectively. Once again everyone was thrown for a loop before Tsunade turned to all of them with the same serious look on her face. Do all of you know the status of Jiraiya? Seeing everyone nod solemnly at her words, she closed her eyes before continuing. We will hold a memorial for him tomorrow at noon for all of you that wish to attend. Now for lighter news and the reason I called all of you here. As you can see, Naruto has returned and with a newly instated shinobi, ni Yugito. Hinata, Neji. I know you might have some resentment for her seeing that she is an ex-Kumo shinobi, but I expect you to put your differences aside as she is one of us now. Hinata nodded quickly as she had no resentment against her as it happened long ago, but Neji reluctantly did so as he did lose his father to the said events. And as such, I expect all of you to treat her fairly and like one of us, especially seeing that her maiden name will shortly changing to Namikaze. Seeing everyone nod as if they were in her place they would want the same treatment, Tsunade smirked wickedly as she turned to both sweating teenagers, wanting to find an escape knowing what she was going to ask but sighed as she had other business to handle first. This now brings me to our next order of business. During the council meeting, I named 2 possible heirs to become the next Hokage. While normally it is kept low-key, the friends end up learning the truth so it would be better to get it out now. I named both Nara Shikamaru and Naruto. The look of surprise was evident on everyone's face, none more so than Shikamaru as he honestly did not want the job as in his opinion it would just be too troublesome. Before he could even say as much, Tsunade cut him short as she glared at him intensely. Shikamaru, I have not chose you to let you allow Naruto to achieve his goal easily. As much as I hate to say it, only the 2 of you are the only qualified shinobi to become the Hokage. Shikamaru, excel in many areas that are needed to become the Hokage but you lack the desire and the raw power to do such. Naruto, while I'm not sure on your full abilities as of now, you have just as much growth as he does to become Hokage. Both of you would make great Hokages. Shikamaru would be like that of my grand-uncles while Naruto would be another Sandaime and Yondaime. And as such, you 2 will begin your training for this immediately. Neither Naruto nor Shikamaru was arguing as she finished. Both knew what she said to be true and weren't going to dispute it, though Shikamaru still thought it was troublesome. Tsunade shook her head at the 2 seeing them both. She smirked once more as her eyes landed on Yugito. Now this brings me to our next and the final thing I called you all here for. As I said before, I want you to treat Yugito with respect, but there is more than it being that she will become a shinobi to our village as I would announce this to everyone. It is that during the time it took for both Naruto and her to arrive here that. Please do not tell a story that you know nothing of. Yugito answered in a violent hiss. It was obvious by her tone and her reaction that she did not want Tsunade speaking about their relationship and was going to be damned if she was going to allow it. Her chakra began pulsing in violent patterns as Naruto quickly stood in front of her in an attempt to calm her down. But before he could and anyone could react, she continued in her anger. My relationship with my betrothed is our business and our business alone. Do not make any plans for us that we aren't ready for, especially after the hell we had to go through to get here. Naruto and I will be together but on our terms, no one else's. A thud was heard as Hinata hit the ground in shock hearing what was said while Naruto looked glum as he heard the thud. For those that knew her, none could say her reaction was surprising as she had a hardcore crush on the blonde. While they knew something like this was likely, they said nothing as it only would cause her more pain and could end up putting her over the edge. Both Kurenai and Neji were at her side, checking to make sure she was physically stable before sighing as they knew that an emotional rollercoaster was coming and that Naruto and Yugito were going to get dragged into this. But one other that cared for Hinata was going to do something. Kiba was growling a storm under his breath as he glared at Naruto. No matter what he had done to shift Hinata's attention away from the blonde and to him, it didn't work. He had resigned himself to having allowed Naruto to have Hinata and this happens. Oh, he was going to make him pay for this. Hinata was the perfect girl in his opinion and Naruto was throwing her away for this girl that smelled like cats. Walking towards Naruto, he pulled his fist back and smacked Naruto in the face. Just as he was about to continue his assault, an arm gripped his shoulder tightly and pulling him back and kept him from moving. It was his other teammate, Shino, who silently whispered to him. Kiba, stop. If you want to do this on your free time, go ahead. But now is not the time. Just know, 4 years can change someone, especially someone that did not know of the other's feelings towards him. As Kiba nodded reluctantly, Shino sighed in relief as a kunai slipped back into Yugito's pouch as she was ready to pounce if he made a move, even if Naruto was holding her back, seeing his aggression towards them. In fact, the punch didn't even seem like it fazed the blonde. This made Shino wonder how strong Naruto actually had become. Shaking his head as now was not the time for this, he spoke to both Naruto and Yugito. I'm sorry for my teammates' actions. It's just, yeah, I know. Hinata had a crush on me. Naruto answered flatly as he put himself in front of Yugito, who still seemed ready to pounce Kiba, but with Tsunade gripping her shoulder it wasn't going to happen. In response, Kiba growled far louder than before as Akamaru was ready to pounce on the blonde, having a similar affection for the blue-haired Kunoichi. You knew about it and didn't do anything? All these years I've been trying to get her to see me and she only had eyes for you. And you don't even tell her that you had no interest in her, or at least try to hook her up with someone else. And then you go out and get hitched with this cat-smelling whore. I'm going to kill you, you fucking dead last. Breaking free of Shino's grip, who was shocked to hear Naruto did know of her crush, Kiba shot past everyone before they could react and was on Naruto and looked him dead in the eye as he was wanted to see the life in his eyes leave him. Soon as he did this, he noticed something was wrong as Naruto's eyes were no longer blue. They were red with a tri-bladed shuriken for a pupil, and they were spinning madly as his left eye began to bleed in the corner. To add to the fear, he heard one word and knew what it was as Kurenai spent her free time trying to replicate it. Tsukiyomi. Kiba found himself strapped to a cross as the world around him bleed red with spots of black and gray. Everyone had disappeared except for Naruto, who was standing in front of him but looking far more menacing than before as his visual appearance had changed. While it wasn't drastic, he was far more feral looking than before and his voice was far deeper than before. Kiba, you're a fool. This only served to make him madder, but Naruto wasn't finished. I couldn't just tell her that. If I did, Hinata would have more than likely committed suicide. What? Kiba responded in shock as he heard this and didn't believe this completely. The Hinata he knew would never do something like that. But to add to his shock, another voice was heard, and this one was female. He is right, Kiba. Hinata would have committed suicide at the time if it wasn't for him. Kurenai answered as she walked up to Naruto, looking around the area and whistling. So this is the legendary genjutsu of the Uchiha clan. I guess you caught me in this as well to show me this as well as to explain to Kiba what was going on. Seeing Naruto nod, she sighed before shaking her head as she turned back to her student. As I said, Kiba, she would have committed suicide if Naruto had come out and told her that he was interested. Seeing that he still didn't understand what she was talking about, Naruto sighed as he took over and stood in front of the tied-back Inazuku. It is simple, Kiba. Due to her father's treatment early in her life combined with the pressure of being the Hyuga heiress and being belittled by the said clan has left her unstable. The only reason I know this is that I used to see all 3 of the counselors in the village and Hinata began visiting them as well. As you know, Yoshino, Shikamaru's mother, is one of them, but the other 2 are rarely used unless it falls under 2 specific categories. Suicidal and the mentally unstable, and the other is rape victims. Yoshino is mostly used for the civilians and shinobi of our villages and can deal with those kinds of victims, but with her being almost completely overwhelmed by the amount she needed help. That's where I come in. Kurenai took over as she stood beside Naruto as she looked up at her student, slightly glad that she wasn't in the same predicament. I was trained to be one of the other 2 counselors and was trained specifically on how to deal with and help those who have been raped. The other counselor is Inoishi as he has the best insight on people's minds and how they work, therefore able to deal with the mentally unstable. Suicide was something all 3 of us were fit to deal with, just Inoishi and I dealt with it more to give Yoshino some rest. On rare occasions all 3 of us would have to counsel one patient. In fact that it is so rare that I can name the 3 people we have had to counsel, but due to confidential reasons the third will be unnamed. The other 2 however can be named as one is Hinata, Kiba. Why do you think I was assigned to your team? A rookie Junin is hardly ever allowed to take a team unless there is a lack of those who do not want to teach. Kiba could only shake as he did know that part, but was still having a hard time believing that what they were saying about Hinata was true. Sensing this, Kurenai could only shake her head as she continued. Believe it or not, Kiba, Hinata was one of the only 3 that have ever been counseled by us. While rape can bring insanity, I have a 100% success rate on preventing it as I know all the signs and how to deal with them. But with Hinata, it was different. She was raped so young that she could not even digest what was happening to her, and with all the problems with her home life, it only festered and ate away at her. While she is not insane, she has shown very many times that she is suicidal and on multiple accounts had been caught in the act. Hiyashi was at a lose at what to do. While he wanted his daughter to be mentally fit, he also wanted her to be the perfect clan heiress. So he sent her to us as much as he could to help her as he worked on turning her into the clan heiress. In truth, that did more harm than good, but nonetheless we allowed it to happen. During our times with her, she began to see her suicidal tendencies began to lessen as she took interest into someone else that constantly being seen by the 3 of us. When we learned of this, we encouraged it and tried to see how the 2 would work together, but the results were dismal at best as the 2 were polar opposites. So, we came up with a plan that would keep her tendencies to a minimum while allowing her to believe that she truly could be with him. Seeing the look on Kiba's face as it began to dawn on him who she was talking about, Naruto sighed as he looked at the strapped-down boy. Yes, Kiba, I was the only other person that has been seen by all 3 of our villager counselors. The only difference is that I was mentally unstable along with being suicidal. If it wasn't for Inoichi-san, Kurenai-sensei and Yoshino-ka-san, I would not have even been allowed into the academy due to my unstable personality. You see, I have multiple personality disorder. While I only had 2, it was 2 vastly different personalities. One was the one everyone sees as more of a happy-go-lucky person with a serious streak to protect those he cares about. But the other's is a whole different story and is part of the reason I'm not acting like I used to. The other was a personality created to deal with all the shit I've been dealt with in my life. And with everything that had happened in my life, my other personality was subjected to it and shaped his hatred for all living things. The truth was it would have never been discovered until I snapped until Kurenai-sensei here asked for Inoichi to check my mental status after I was raped on my 6th birthday. It was on that day I first met Hinata and they tried to see if we could help each other. In the end it didn't work, but that's when Hinata's feelings for me intensified and she began to become possessive of me. Naruto at the end could only sigh as he looked over at Kurenai so she would continue for him. Catching his eyes, Kurenai quickly did so as she could see he did not like having to talk about this. That was becoming a problem as she was bringing out Naruto's 2nd personality, and with his temper and being prone to violence we had to separate the 2 and wipe Hinata's memories. But even still, we couldn't wipe the feeling she felt for him. That is why she stalked Naruto at times even though she didn't know why she was doing it. She crushed after Naruto as she subconsciously believed that he was what she was to be and therefore the one for her. So when she began to do this and Naruto began to report that she did, we told him not to as he was still having a positive effect on her. When I said when the 2 worked together was dismal, I meant for Naruto as Hinata was improving with him around. While I cannot state why it was, let us just say it was not pretty. As she finished, Kiba began ingesting everything he was told slowly. While he still didn't believe some of what he was told, he was beginning to understand as Kurenai was there. The only reason he did know she was there was that her scent was the same, which was odd as genjutsus rarely were so powerful that they could fool the sense of smell. As he slowly came to accept what they told him, though still not believing a small portion, he closed his eyes before turning to Naruto. Naruto, I'm sorry. While I still don't believe all this, if it is true it does explain a lot. But I will have to speak with Hinata to make sure first. Naruto nodded as Kurenai looked ready to be released from the genjutsu when Kiba screamed in pain as a sword pierced through the cross. It pierced into his stomach and into his rib cage before twisting violently, earning another scream from him as Kurenai attempted to put a hand in front of her mouth only to find herself unable to move. Naruto looked at the Inazuku pitilessly as the sword was viciously ripped out of him as another Naruto from behind him pulled it out before disappearing. That, Kiba, was for calling my fiancée a whore. Do so again and I will put you through the entirety of this jutsu and show you what it can truly do. And with that the genjutsu was released. Kiba hit the floor on all fours as he choked violently and attempted to gasp for air before vomit gushed from his mouth. Soon as it passed, Kiba began to catch his breath as Kurenai walked over to him, sweating a storm and panting lightly from witnessing what she did. Casting a sleeping genjutsu on him to help calm him down and recover, she looked over at Tsunade, who seemed ready to throw both Kiba and Naruto into jail for what just happened. "Tsunade-sama, I request Naruto to continue his counseling under Inoichi, Yoshino and myself." Tsunade's heart stopped hearing this, never knowing that Naruto had undergone counseling before and under the three of them. While she was away from the village, she did know that the three were the best counselors for shinobi around, and the fact that Naruto was seeing them meant that he was. She gritted her teeth at the thought and wished the old man was alive for allowing Naruto's life to get so out of control. Having very little control of herself, she was glad she didn't have to answer as Naruto did before. "Only on one condition. I wish my fiancé to undergo counseling as well. From all three of you." The blood stopped as all the shinobi that knew of Kurenai's status as the rape recovery counselor, and that meant one thing and one thing only. They only glimpsed at Yugito as she caught them and glared back at them to stop their staring as her eyes focused in on Naruto, not liking the idea of being seen by a counselor. Before she could say anything to him though, Naruto beat her to the punch as he turned to her before hugging her tightly and bringing his mouth to her ear and whispering so no one else could hear. "Do not fight this. We both need counseling for what we have just gone through. Not only that, but they can help you recover from what they did to you, babe. Everything I've done to help you has been based on what they did for me, so please don't fight this. I want both you and me to get better." Yugito's heart pulsed a few times as he hugged her tighter to him as she didn't answer. She did believe that Naruto would do whatever was best for her before himself, but having never been seen by a counselor before, she had no idea on what to expect. But hearing that Naruto had gone through it before meeting her convinced her that it could help her, and with him saying he was using what they taught him was more reassuring. Taking a deep breath as she regained control of her emotions as she melted into his touch and nodded. "Okay, I will." Naruto smiled at the blonde girl in his grasp as she listened to him. While he loved her as she was, he was quite worried that if she didn't talk about what she had gone through to someone that understood and could help, that she would completely lose herself. He did understand what she went through, but not being completely over everything in his life couldn't help very much. Looking over at Kiba, he sighed lightly before looking over at Tsunade's general direction. "He will wake up in about 20 minutes. I didn't use Tsukiyomi to torture him, only to inform him of confidential information and to teach him never to insult my fiancé." While many paled at what he said and mentally made a note not to piss Naruto off from now on, Tsunade raised her eyebrow hearing this before nodding, as one thing she wasn't allowed to know was personal information unless the said person was either a danger to her or the village. She was also quite glad that he didn't use the full power of the jutsu he had used, but something had her worried as Naruto wasn't looking directly at her. "Naruto, never use that jutsu on anyone from this village again, do you understand me? I will let this one go as Kiba instigated the event, but I believe going through that jutsu once is enough punishment even if it wasn't used the way it was meant for. Kurenai, as for your request, I will grant it, but I order all three of you to counsel Yugito as well. But in both of their cases, I want to get reports on their status." Kurenai nodded lightly as she kept an eye on Naruto the entire time, knowing something was up and wanted to get to the bottom of it. She wasn't the only one, but Tsunade was going to wait until the reports on his status to find out. But there was something that was bothering her far more as she finally noticed the blood leaking from Naruto's eye. She flinched at the sight before her eyes narrowed at him as he still wasn't looking directly at her. "Naruto, why aren't you looking at me, and why is your eye bleeding?" Naruto sighed lightly as he closed his eyes, not really wanting to answer her question but getting a nudge from Yugito, who he could feel was giving him the look to tell her. Sighing a bit deeper, he continued looking in Tsunade's directions as he shifted his eyes back to their normal color, only for them to be a very dull blue. For the bleeding, it is quite simple. There is a price of using such powerful jutsu. In the case of Tsukiyomi, I get a temporary but severe headache and at times lose blood from my eyes. Amaterasu is quite the same, except I always bleed and the headache isn't as severe. And to answer your other question, it was because the eyes I gained from Itachi were practically blind. All three medics shocked hearing this as everyone else in the room remained silent, not sure what was going on or how Naruto got Itachi's eyes. The three medics knew there was one thing they could not cure, and that was blindness. While it could be stalled, the person would sooner or later go blind. Sensing that all three were like this, Naruto quickly continued. I am only blind for a few hours after using one of the jutsu and is why I don't try to use it very often. Soon as they were implanted and attached, Kyuubi began working on recovering their eyesight so I could see, but it has been a long and difficult task. He ignored the few gasps of those who didn't know of Kyuubi, but at the moment he didn't care as he continued speaking. She right now is pissed at me for using it as it set her back another month to completely heal them. If I refrained from using Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi again until they are completely healed, it will take 3 months. Looking back at the rest of the group, he sighed deeply. And for all of you that didn't know until just now, I do hold the Kyuubi no Kitsune prisoner in my gut. I really don't want to explain the details, so ask your senseis later or those that already knew. Now if this is all Ba-chan, I would like to go home and get some rest. I am tired. Catching the tone of his voice, Tsunade nodded at him before turning to Sakura and motioning her over. Alright Naruto, you and Yugito can leave. Sakura will take you to your apartment as you can't see at the moment and I doubt Yugito knows where it is. I will try to have it set up so that you can move into your father's estate by the end of the week, but no promises. It hasn't been looked over for years now, so I'll have to send cleaning crews to fix it up. Until then you two will have to make do with the apartment. Other than that, I will have you both reporting for counseling at 2 in the afternoon every day. Everyone else is to stay here as there is still a little more business to attend to. Nodding lightly, Sakura led both Naruto and Yugito out of the room, Yugito leading Naruto by her holding his hand. Once they left the room, Tsunade looked at all the shinobi she called into the room before shaking her head at some of the stunned looks some of them had on their faces. Getting annoyed by it, she decided to start answering unasked questions. Yes, as some of you didn't know, Naruto does indeed hold Kyuubi. But that shouldn't affect your view of him as you know him all this time. If you want to know more, ask your senseis, as Naruto doesn't want to explain and neither do I, and with him being open about carrying the fox I will slowly lift the ban about talking about the fox, but only those in this room will be allowed to do so. And for those of you that didn't figure it out, Naruto is the son of the Yondaime Hokage, who is both the damned deceased pervert and my son. As for his mother, he will have to tell you about that one, as I really didn't even know who he was married to. And on a final note, I would some assistance when the two finally decide to get hitched. I can cover the fiancés, but I want each of you to chip in and help with the preparations. All of you are his friends and should have no problem in doing this, as I've already done my part. Now, you may leave, but I implore you to give Naruto and Yugito some time before approaching them about what happened when they were gone. Tsunade said solemnly at the end as her eyes began to water up, even if she was doing her best not to show any emotions. Each nodded, seeing the Hokage holding herself back with all her strength, and quickly left. As soon as they did, only leaving Shizune, Tsunade burst and began sobbing heavily onto her desk. Shizune didn't waste any time as she was at her master's side and started to try and calm her down. While she was depressed as well hearing about Jiraiya's death, she knew Tsunade was hurting far worse, as the two were close even if they didn't show it most of the time. Outside on their way to Naruto's apartment, Sakura was leading the way. But her curiosity was getting the best of her as she continued looking back at Naruto and Yugito. She knew better than to ask in front of Naruto, as most guys didn't like to be caught up in girl talk, but she made plans to get Yugito by herself and ask her a few questions that she would more than likely not answer with him around. Seeing that they were almost at this apartment, she pulled out the keys he left her and unlocked the door as they reached the apartment. I did as you asked, Naruto, and watered and checked up on the plants. Also, Ino and I cleaned up to make your place look neat and not like a dump. Naruto blushed at the last part while making a mental note to get Sakura back at her for that, as he was with Yugito. Yugito on the other hand shrugged as if she expected it as they walked in, and was quite surprised to see the floor sparkling and furniture completely clean. She made a mental note to ask for Sakura and this Ino to be the one sent to clean out the Yondaime's place, as she could get used to having such a clean room. Taking her sandals off at the doorway just as Naruto and Sakura did, she noted that Naruto was heading in the back unsupervised and was about to go after him when he turned back to her. Don't worry, Tenchi. As long as I'm here I can walk in here without seeing fine. Besides, I'm going to be in the back resting, and it seems Sakura wants to ask you a few questions, and I know you have a few of your own. She stopped hearing this and nodded lightly as he walked into the back room before turning towards the pink-haired girl. Soon as the door clicked shut in his room and knowing he couldn't hear her, she looked over Sakura, who seemed to be nervous as it seemed she was measuring her up, which in truth was true. "So you are the Sakura he talks about?" Sakura perked up hearing this and was wondering what Naruto had said about her when Yugito continued in a deadpanned voice. "You're not as pretty as he made you out to be." Sakura couldn't help but face fault at this and began grumbling about blondes that she was going to beat the crap out of later. Catching this, Yugito smiled a little as she began to start liking the girl herself, but she had to make something clear and she would do this with her and Hinata if need be. "I'm not so naive to say I'm any better looking than you, but I will say this here and now. If you do anything to try to split me and Naruto apart, I will leave you without being able to have children. Do you get me? I know that Naruto crushed over you a few years back and I respect if you want to be a part of his life as a friend, but he is my future husband and I'm not letting him get away." At the end she growled out in an intimidating fashion as she repressed her killing intent. The pink-haired shinobi was shocked at the sheer ferocity in her voice and could understand why she was acting the way she was. Naruto was a diamond in the rough as she looked back on it. He would do anything for those he loved and didn't want anything back for it. He cared for more than a lot of people could and tried to help those around him no matter what. Nodding lightly as she knew now that her blonde-haired teammate was taken, she spoke in a soft voice. "I wouldn't dream of it. While I do care for Naruto, he is my teammate and friend and I want him to be happy just as he would want me to be happy." Soon as she said that, Yugito looked somewhat pleased before she took a deep breath to calm herself down. Once she did, she looked Sakura with a mild expression showing not much other than a little content. "That's all I wanted to hear. Now what do you want to ask me? I am tired as well and need to rest like my fiancé." Catching Yugito's drift, Sakura nodded as she didn't want to impose. "It can wait for another time. Both of you are tired and need to rest." Nodding lightly, Yugito smiled lightly as Sakura walked over to the door and put her sandals back on. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Yugito, and I'll talk to both of you later. Oh, and tell Naruto that I would like to talk to him later." Nodding again, she half-heartedly waved goodbye as Sakura exited the apartment and shook her head as she left. Taking another deep breath, she removed her cloak and threw it onto the couch to reveal her black and white wardrobe before slipping into the bathroom. Once she exited, she was wearing a black t-shirt that seemed to belong to Naruto and a pair of his old penguin boxers that fit her snuggly. Shaking her head at his old choice of clothes, she walked into the bedroom to see Naruto seeming to look out of the window. "Were you staying up just waiting for me?" Naruto nodded lightly as he turned in her general area as he was still unable to see very much, but he could now see blurry objects. "Yes, I was. I guess I've grown accustomed to sleeping with you that reverting back to the way it was before is a little difficult. Besides, you two didn't take that long as I knew she wouldn't ask them after you gave her your message." Yugito flinched at this part, but Naruto shook his head and continued. "While I don't like you threatening my friends, I do know why. But please refrain from doing so to Hinata. She has another trouble to deal with and doesn't need that added to it. I will deal with her when the time comes." Yugito nodded lightly as he picked up the covers and motioned her over. Smiling lightly, she slid underneath them and melded into his left side and wrapped her arms around his chest as he wrapped his arm around her waist while the sheets fell on top of them. She smiled lightly as he kissed her gently on the nose before lowering his aim and kissing her deeply on the lips. She refrained from moaning into the kiss before breaking it off as she leaned her head up against his chin. "I'll do my best not to. But if she starts something, I will not hesitate to defend myself." Nodding as he expected that much, he looked down at the blonde-haired girl in his grasp. "That's all I can ask for. Now let's get some sleep. I don't know about you, but not sleeping last night to get her has left me exhausted." Hearing a yawn as her response, he could only shake his head while smiling as he closed his eyes while holding her tightly to him as he slowly let his exhaustion get the better of him. Looking around the camp, she sighed lightly as she checked over her equipment. She did not want to do this mission, especially after having gotten to know the blonde-haired Konoha shinobi for the previous 2 weeks. She wasn't sure why, but he just seemed to make her a little happier when he was around, and he was quite kind even though at times he was pretty blunt. But that didn't matter anymore. She was taken without even having a choice in the matter. The Raikage had signed her fate away to Kurabi as soon as she accepted this mission. While he was okay at times, she knew that he was not the type of man she wanted to spend her life with. Taking a peek at where he was, she refrained from hissing lightly. She quickly slapped her hands in front of her mouth as she did this. For some reason Nibby was far more defensive than the cat normally was and was taking charge of her instincts. The said cat didn't like most people but had accepted the blonde teen far more readily than she had or even his tenant had accepted her. Something about him calmed the cat down drastically, and now Karabi was just putting the cat on edge as if it was expecting something. She was wondering what was going on and was about to ask it when she noticed all the guys looking at her with an odd glint in their eyes. Not liking the look, she was about to stand up and go clean up when she found herself pinned to the ground. She gritted her teeth as she tried to break their grip but was unable to do so as they tied her up. She felt Nibby's chakra flood her system, but that too was halted when a suppression tag was placed onto her forehead. Her hands were quickly tied up as Karabi stood in front of her before ripping her clothes off. Her eyes widened as she began to understand what was going to happen, and she wiggled and wormed her way out of their hold and rope, but they held firm when it started. She was writhing in pain as they gripped her body tightly. She was unable to defend herself from their advances, and they were taking her like a pleasure doll. She wanted nothing more than it to stop. Anything to get it to stop. They were taking turns with her now and using any entrances they could find to get themselves off. She tried to bite down, but they had placed another tag on her that cut off her body's nerve connections with her brain. Why did this have to happen to her? Why now during this mission? Couldn't they see that they were causing her enough pain as they filled her to the brim and continued on? All she wanted to do was scream, but she gagged every time she tried. They wouldn't even give her that much, but why was she feel as if someone was trying to comfort her? Yugito, wake up babe. Naruto began shaking the screaming form of Yugito as she relived what they had done to her. He was getting worried as she shuddered and squirmed in his grasp and was trying to break his grip even if the attempts were feeble at best. Not wanting to see her like this, he wrapped her into a tight hug and started running his hand down her spine. He knew it was helping as her trembling was slowly coming to a stop. But he knew this was only the beginning as he held the girl tightly to him as her eyes shot open and began looking around the room in a panic. Calm down, Angel. It's only a dream. They can no longer harm you again. Take a deep breath and relax. No one here is going to hurt you again. Yugito looked up at the man holding her and was still panicking. She knew deep down he would do nothing to harm her, but her instincts were overruling her train of thought as she struggled to break his grip and No was trying her hardest to do so. She nearly succeeded, however he held firm and she screamed as loud as she could. The scream seemed to do more in her any of her attempts to break free of his grip as she successfully got free and attempted to leap out of the bed when the same arms quickly snaked their way around her waist and pulled her back. She scratched at the bedding, trying to free herself when she felt two pulses of chakra flooding her system. Her body began to calm down as the chakra told her more than even her instincts could. Both were calm and soothing her, and she stopped screaming as she regained control of her vocal cords. The first she could tell was her inner demon Nibby, as she had done this with her in the past to calm her down. While she hadn't done it for this before, it was just something the Nekomata, cat demon, would do to soothe her nerves. However, the other chakra was puzzling her before she felt someone on top of her. Her instincts began to kick in once more before her reason shoved it out of the way. Knowing who it was as she had identified the other chakra source. Curling herself up and into his grip, she closed her eyes before speaking softly after she took a few deep breaths as she could see their faces and didn't want to look at him, afraid she would see them. Naruto, don't leave me. I won't, Angel. Now take a few deep breaths and catch your breath back. He sighed in relief as she was beginning to listen to him. He was worried at first when she started to scream, and he could feel a few chakra signatures heading towards them, and he knew they were Anbu that scouted the city for intruders wanting to do a better job after allowing Sasuke to sneak out of the village unnoticed. Sighing as this was going to be a difficult morning, Naruto picked Yugito up and sat her onto his lap and placed his chin on top of her head, having a small idea of what was going on in her mind. He knew they would be there pretty quickly, but for now, he would take care of her. So you want to tell me what that was about? As she didn't answer, he sighed, knowing that she wasn't going to tell him right away. She would eventually tell him, but it would take her a while as she was still in shock. Holding her closer, he sighed as he felt the signatures getting closer. Knowing that he was going to have to deal with them, Naruto created a few shadow clones. One he sent to do breakfast, another to stay with Yugito, and his final one to clean up, having a feeling he was going to get a few visitors today outside of the Anbu heading their direction. He felt her wince when the clones appeared and sighed as he held her closer to him than before. He knew she was still recovering from what they had done to her, and he knew she would never be the same person again. Normally she didn't panic like this, but every now and then it was to be expected. Nonetheless, he would help her step by step and stay at her side as he promised her that when he gave her the ring on her finger. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hand on her chin and gently lifted it up, making her look him in the eyes. "Babe, I have something to deal with right quick." "No." Yugito nearly screamed at him again as she tried to break free of his grip, forcing him to hold her tighter than before. Grunting as she elbowed him a few times, he held on before kissing her on the lips. He hated that her entire body froze as he did so, but it was the best way to get her attention on him. Pulling back with her looking straight at him, he slowly released his grip of her. "Babe, we have a few Anbu heading here because of your screaming, and I have to deal with them, otherwise shit will probably hit the fan. So please, it will only take a moment." "No," she responded, cutting him off once more, but this time instead of trying to get away from him, she curled into him as if he was her last lifeline. Hearing her voice was softer and more subdued, he felt a little better, as she was feeling better than when she woke up. As he held her close to him, he noticed that her skin was a little paler than unusual and her body temperature was slightly higher than before. He frowned, thinking that she was sick again, before having remembered she had been like this in the morning the last week as they traveled to the village. This had him worried, and he wanted Tsunade or Shizune to look her over as something was up. Feeling her squirm in his grip again, his senses caught an intruder into his house before he relaxed, knowing the presence very well. If it was him, he had no need to worry as he heard everything yesterday. "Naruto, is everything here all right?" Iruka's calm voice echoed from outside the door after a quick knock. Not getting an answer, the dolphin slowly opened the door to make sure they were decent before seeing the boy he considered his son holding desperately onto the blonde-haired girl he had only met the day before. He instantly knew what was wrong as he motioned for one of his subordinates and whispering to them, "Go to Yuhi's house and tell her there is an emergency at Uzu Namikaze's apartment. The rest of you return to your patrol. I'll stay here." While the Anbu at first titled his head at the name, he followed his order and disappeared with a swirl of leaves as the rest went on with their duty. As the Anbu disappeared, Iruka sighed as he took off his mask and slowly entered the room. "Is there anything I can do? You've already called Kurenai, so just stay out of the room." Naruto answered as he tightened his embrace on his fellow blonde as she saw Iruka and began to tremble lightly as her eyes widened from the fear of what might happen. Iruka noticed that her grip onto him had increased, and he noticed a small amount of blood leaking underneath her fingers. He felt useless to Naruto once more, but he knew the boy was thankful for him calling Kurenai as he could see the tiredness in the blonde's eyes. He knew the young boy had been dealing with this for a while and he wanted to help him, but this was all he could do. He had to admit that Naruto had far more strength than he imagined, as he knew that this was bring out bad memories for him as well. Flashback. It was a cold and bitter October night. Things could have been better for the newly appointed Chunin, but Iruka was still happier than he had been in years. He was finally a Chunin, and now he was ready to take part of the harder missions and be exposed to new dangers. While this would deter most people, the dolphin was looking forward to it as he wanted to become an Anbu ever since he talked to the Hokage at the Memorial Stone. He was minding his business, heading to the house his parents owned before they perished. He normally would have taken the main roads, but he felt like taking the back roads as he was still too hyped about being promoted and wanted to release some of his pent-up energy. He noticed a few people in front of him running off into the distance, but he paid no heed to them as he figured they were trying to get home. As he neared where he saw them, a sound caught his ears and he was instantly alert. He wasn't sure what it was at first, but something told him it was not good. Getting ready for the worst, Iruka was ready to fight when he heard the sound again. On, hell. The young Chunin's eyes widened as he realized the sound was a person. No, not a person. A young child, a boy it sounded like. Looking around, he saw nothing at first until his eyes caught a few trash cans and cardboard boxes collapsed over an almost indecipherable object. Seeing the slightest movement from the cans and boxes, Iruka didn't hesitate this time as he pushed them off. He felt sick at the sight of a young boy covered in tattered clothes, dirt clods and a small amount of blood and rank of a sickening smell. The next thing he knew, he was looking into the clearest pair of blue eyes he had ever seen. Iruka felt sicker at the sight as he could see the pain in the boy's eyes and didn't wait for a second as he reached down and picked up the young boy. The boy flinched and attempted to break free of his grip, but he was too weak to do so. "No, don't hurt me." Feeling the boy panic, he wasn't sure what to do, so he acted on gut instinct. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I'm going to take you to the hospital, okay?" Once again, Iruka was looking into the boy's eyes before he saw the small head nod. "Okay, Mr. Ninja." Iruka smiled softly at the boy as he jumped on top of the building and jumped roof to roof towards the hospital. He was unsure why someone would hurt such a seemingly nice boy. Flashback end. Sighing at the memory, he knew if it wasn't for the boy he would have probably became an Anbu earlier, but he had something much more now. He knew what it meant to be an older brother and a father, and that was a feeling he did not want to lose. He was taken aback when two sets of leaves swirled behind him as he saw Kurenai and his subordinate reappear, the former only wearing a loose yukata as she was probably sleeping only moments ago. In fact, he was sure she was, as he saw the deer mask of his partner had a few cracks indicating that she had slapped him, probably for barging in on her. Naruto's eyes quickly turned to Kurenai as she rushed into the room. If he could, he would have smiled, but he was just too tired to do so. Yugito also noticed the black-haired Kunoichi's entrance and clung tighter to him before. She didn't notice him flinch in her grasp as she kept her eyes firmly on the intruder, wanting nothing more than her to leave. Seeing the shape Naruto was in, Kurenai knew she had to defuse the situation they were in, as the girl was unintentionally harming Naruto in her panicked state. Looking over towards Naruto, she turned her attention back to girl. "Yugito, you can let go of him. No one here is going to hurt you." All Kurenai received was a growl from Yugito as she tightened her already firm grip. Naruto bit his lip as her fingers dug into his waist while her legs added more pressure to his creaking spine. Closing his eyes for a moment, he spoke with his best voice to try and calm his lover down without letting her know she was hurting him. "Babe, it's all right. She is only here to help." Yugito looked up at him for a moment before her eyes narrowed at him. She did not need help. She needed someone that understood what it was like, and it seemed that he truly didn't. Growling to herself, she pulled back her hands only for Naruto to embrace her into a firm hug as he placed his chin on top of her head once more. "Yugito, please listen to me. She can help. She helped me, so I know she can help you." Kurenai said nothing as it seemed that Naruto had this in control and only watched until she was needed. Feeling the calmness of his voice and the warmth of his body, Yugito closed her eyes as she leaned into his embrace, her head onto his chest so she could listen to his heartbeat. After a few moments, he released his grip on her and she looked up at him softly before nodding as she reached her hand out to his face. "Thank you." She stopped dead in her sentence as she noticed the blood on her fingers. Fearing the worst, Kurenai quickly and roughly separated Yugito from Naruto, knowing that she was going to start panicking again. Once she was in between them, she firmly gripped the blonde-haired girl, hooking her legs around her, and sat onto the bed. "Naruto, go. If you stay, she'll only panic more. I'll take care of her now." While her words hurt, Naruto knew that Kurenai meant his appearance would rattle her more. He quickly left the room. He went straight to the couch, ignoring that it was being taken up by another occupant, and plopped onto the seat opposite of the dolphin. "Don't you have a job to do?" Ignoring the harsh tone, Iruka shook his head as the deer-masked Anbu rummaged through the cabinets before pulling out a package tea bags as Naruto's clone had placed a kettle to boil. Pulling out a few bags of tea and a few cups, the deer-masked Anbu removed his mask to reveal his rather blank face and lavender eyes. "No, we were mostly here to be your guard. Sure, we're supposed to guard the sector, but Lady Tsunade won't dock our pay too much, if at all, for making sure you're alright." Naruto only grunted at the Hyuga as he figured he knew where his tea was due to his eyes. Having an idea hit him, he turned to Neji and was about to speak when the Hyuga quickly shot him down in a passive voice. "No, even if I could, I will not spy on them to let you know what Kurenai is doing with your fiancé. She's put up a jutsu that blocks off any outside intrusion into your room." Refraining from snapping at the Hyuga, Naruto turned back and leaned onto the couch while keeping his focus on the wall in front of them. He really didn't care that his foster father was looking at him worriedly. All he cared about was what was happening in the room between his counselor and his fiancée. The gloomy look on the blonde's face was something that Iruka was not very used to. While he had seen him angry and annoyed, this was far beyond either. Taking the tea Neji handed him, he turned to the blonde before taking a sip. "Naruto, you have to relax. Kurenai knows what she is doing. I'm not worried about that." Naruto simply answered as he kept his gaze straight ahead and leaning further back into the couch. Neji raised his eyebrow at this as he placed a cup of tea for the blonde on the coffee table before pulling up a stool and sitting right in front of him to keep him from ignoring them so easily. The Hyuga was very good at reading people and he knew the whole story from the minute muscle twitches he had caught so far. "You're afraid something will happen to the girl." Naruto wanted to throttle the Hyuga for pinpointing his source of worry. Also, he was forcing him to either look at him, Iruka, or the wall between this room and his room. All he wanted to do was brood, but no, they couldn't give him that. Seeing the twitching in his arm and the glare he was being given, Neji knew he was on target. He was also irritating the blonde and he seemed very edgy and incentive at the moment and was ready to attack him. While this reminded him of Sasuke from what he remembered about the Raven, he shook that off before turning back to the blonde and nodding. "You need not worry about her. She is in very capable hands. It's not that I'm worried about her. I'm just worried about what she can do." Naruto interrupted as he looked at the wall separating him between Yugito, hoping that everything was alright. This caught Iruka's attention. He knew how strong Kurenai was firsthand and to be honest he wouldn't want to get into a one-on-one fight against her. He also understood that the girl was a demon vessel like Naruto, but he was sure Kurenai had a few suppression seals if she was confident enough to seal off the room from outside contact. Still, the girl's strengths were unknown to virtually everyone but Naruto, so it very well could have been a bad idea for Kurenai to seal the room away from help. "Don't worry about what could happen. Kurenai's skills are first class and she, even in the state she's in, would be prepared for the worst case scenario. I'm not worried about Nibi. I'm worried as she is currently the strongest shinobi in this village as I cannot use Hiraishin on her without fearing that I would cause injury and Tsunade is about the only one physical enough to wear her down outside of me." Naruto responded without hesitation, his eyes never leaving the wall as if he was piercing through it and seeing what was in within. Both Iruka and Neji's faces fell as they heard this. She was that strong. If that was the case, how in the world was Naruto restraining her when they got there? Unless she wasn't reacting violently as she had a small awareness of her surroundings and knew Naruto didn't meant her harm, even if her body was telling her otherwise. It stayed silent for a whole 10 minutes, outside of the occasional sips of tea by the three, before the door finally opened. The next moment music was blasting out of the room, making each of them hold their ears for a moment before adjusting to the sound. Naruto resisted the urge to run over towards the door when he saw Kurenai walk out, looking a little worn out but with a smile on her face. "She's doing okay for now. Just make sure you two are on time for today's session. And make sure to bring your CDs like before. It seems both of you have that fix." "Yeah, we had many long nights that music was our only escape." Naruto forced a chuckle before he bowed lightly to Kurenai. Not even waiting for a response, he quickly headed for the door before he actually began to chuckle. Lying on the bed, Yugito seemed to be dancing and rolling around to the music as it played. Shaking his head, Naruto quickly jumped onto the bed beside her. "Mind if I join you, love?" Yugito only purred in response as her smile widened seeing Naruto. She wasn't sure why, but music seemed to make her problems go away as she listened to the melodies. And his presence always calmed her even before this mess had begun. "Hun, you know it." She finally verbally responded before nuzzling her face to his, which he seemed to do the same. While it seems somewhat like a feral gesture, it probably was explained quite well due to the fact that they were both demon vessels and more in tune with their animal instincts. Smiling as she watched the two interact for a while longer, to see if Yugito would relapse but glad to see she didn't, Kurenai yawned before looking over to see Iruka and Neji put their masks on. "Iruka, seeing as you are Naruto's guardian, at least to the latest records, I will need to be seeing you soon for one of the sessions. Thanks for the heads up. I'll ask for time off so I'll be able to make it." Iruka responded before he disappeared in a plume of smoke with Neji, getting back to their patrols. Looking back in on the two, Kurenai had to repress a laugh as Naruto and Yugito both were now out of bed and dancing to the music, both being pretty horrid dancers. Shaking her head, she left and a plum of smoke to her house has left the two to their own devices. She had to get dressed before reporting what had happened to the Hokage, then to Inoichi and Yoshino. Naruto, I really don't want to be here. Yugito quivered as she stood with her fiancé in Yoshina's office. She didn't like how white the room was and how still everything was. It seemed to be lifeless. Not liking it very much either, Naruto laid his arm over his shoulders before holding her closer to him. You promised you would, just as I did. And don't worry, the room they see us in is more lively than this. Will they separate us? Yugito asked as she didn't want to go through this if Naruto wasn't nearby. Sighing, Naruto nodded before he brought his lips to hers for a brief kiss. They will, but I'll be just outside. You have my kunai, so if you start to panic, don't be afraid to use it. I'll be at your side in an instant to help you calm down. But please try to get through it. It will help you. Whimpering a little after her broke their kiss, she nodded softly before laying her head against his. Alright, but you promise you'll be outside for me? I will be, babe. So don't worry so much. Besides, before they start the sessions, they normally start finding ways to keep you calm. As such, I brought my CDs so they'll play them if you like. Naruto responded as he nuzzled her head gently. This tender scene was what Tsunade happened to see as she walked into the office, going to oversee the treatment herself for the first few times. She smiled warmly at the pair, hating to break them up for any reason. They looked good together, and the way Naruto looked after her, she knew he loved her deeply, and she could tell Yugito loved him just as much. She was just afraid to show it, especially now surrounded by new people. So how long are you going to stay over there and watch us, old hag? Naruto commented as he had heard someone enter, and having become familiar with her presence he was easily able to decipher it was Tsunade. Tsunade only grumbled. Naruto had indeed gotten better as he didn't even need to look to tell it was her. Ha brat, I'm here to oversee the first few treatments. I'm also quite worried about what you told Haruka, so it might be necessary for me to be here all the time. Turning to see the Hokage, Yugito was unsure what Tsunade was talking of. She had to guess that Haruka had to be the Anbu that arrived when she had begun to freak out. So what did Naruto tell? I see, you warned them of my strength? Had to. On your best days not even I can contain you. Sorry if you didn't want them to know. Naruto answered honestly as he saw no harm in them knowing now that she was a part of the village. And he couldn't lie to her, even if he tried. It's okay, I understand. It is in the best interest for everyone involved, including me. Yugito replied as he knew all of the procedures that went on behind the scenes. There were no differences even if the villages differed drastically in approaches. Smiling, Naruto froze as he recognized another presence near. It took him a moment to place it, but he immediately knew it belonged to Hinata. She wasn't there before, so he doubted she was the patient Yoshino was seeing at the very moment. So what was she doing here? Was she trying to stalk them? Naruto didn't like that. He had nothing but good things to say about Hinata, but that was low. If that was indeed what she was doing, he would not hesitate and react even if he didn't want to. He didn't need anyone causing a strain in his relationship with Yugito. She was his fiancée and she was who he wanted to be with. His attention was broken when Yoshino walked out with a young man and waved to him before she smiled seeing both Naruto and Yugito there. Ah, it is good to see you both. And on time. We used to have to drag Naruto here kicking and screaming as he called this place too boring and lifeless. Yugito smiled hearing that as she was thinking the same way. In fact, running away seemed like a good idea, but Naruto would catch her easily as he was much faster even without his jutsu. Well, that's another thing we have in common. This place still looks boring and lifeless. Ah, but the difference is we changed the other room to make the patients more comfortable. Before it used to look like this as well. What would we ever do without medical studies? Yoshino added as she smiled at the blonde, having a feeling she would be a lot like Naruto and hard to get to. I heard you have one of Naruto's fixes which makes things a little easier, so Naruto, if you don't mind. Yeah, I brought my entire case. Naruto replied before handing her a rather large CD case with each slot filled. Tsunade only blinked at the collect. Good lord brat, is that why you only had ramen, bread, cereal and milk? I mean, did you spend every extra penny you got on CDs? No, many of these were gifts and many more were given to me by everyone here. I only bought about a quarter of what is in the case. I just happened to like ramen and seeing it was cheap, I saved up a lot of money. Half of which was spent by the damned pervert, may he rest in a hellish peace for that. Naruto responded as Yoshino took the case and shook her head. Well, shall we head into the room, Miss Ni? Kurenai and Inoichi are already waiting for us. Yoshino beckoned as she opened the door for Yugito. Hesitant at first, Yugito looked at for Naruto. Being brought in for another kiss, she gathered her courage before tentatively heading in. Seeing both the woman that had helped her calm down in the morning and a man that looked strangely like the blonde-haired ponytailed girl from yesterday, Yugito slowly moved to the couch, which was conveniently open, and softly sat down as she didn't know what to expect. Yoshino closed the door after Tsunade entered and took her post on the far side of the room, happy to just observe. Before even moving to the open chair, Yoshino scurried over to the stereo and after a quick search of the CDs she placed one in and hit play. As she sat down, the music began to play. It stayed silent for a few moments, however, the tension was easily broken as Yugito began to hum in tune with the music. She did notice that they seemed to be taking notes, probably gauging her reaction before they would start. Can we begin? This is making me uncomfortable. Sorry about that, but we needed a few moments to observe your reaction to the music. I'm glad to see that music works well with you as well. It makes things easier on our end. Inoichi responded as he put away the notebook he had been writing in. Kurenai nodded in agreement, however, kept her notebook in plain sight. Before we can begin to help you along the way to recovery, we need a little information first. Normally Lady Tsunade would have taken care of this yesterday, but with the chaos that happened she didn't. After that, we'll begin. Yugito simply nodded, knowing the procedure once again when Kurenai asked her first question. What is your date of birth? June 24, 237 Rs. Blood type, I'm 5 foot 7 inches and weight is 112 pounds. Anything else or can we begin? Yugito responded slightly annoyed as she knew the basic questions and rather just fill out the paper herself and save the trouble. Kurenai's pen nearly snapped as she wrote down her age and date of birth. She was 29 years old and about to turn 30 in a month. She was older than Anko by 2, almost 3 years. And she was planning on marrying Naruto, who was about to be 13 years younger than she was and nearly half her age. Taking the paper out and filling the information herself, Tsunade sighed. It wasn't that big of a deal. The legal age was 18 for civilians, 15 for genin or whatever age a ninja was when they were promoted to chunin, which in some cases was very young, as ninjas could die at any time so were given more freedoms. Hell, Shizune married at 14 before her husband died during Kyuubi's attack. No, you can begin now. Yoshino, who fully expected Yugito to be older than she looked, was the first to enunciate the session. Yugito, to start with we are going to ask what your life in Cloud like. Did you enjoy it, hate it, stuff like that so we can draw the proper conclusions. After that we will begin seeing what else works to calm you down if we have time. Nodding as she moved to lie on her back, Yugito laid her head on the arm rest. Okay, how long do these sessions normally last before we begin? They last up to an hour unless there are special circumstances where we either cut it short or extend the session. We tend not to let it go on for too long as a person's average attention span is very short. Any more and it would be ineffective. Now shall we begin? Inoichi explained as he could tell by her body posture and her shiftiness that she was uncomfortable despite the music playing. Sighing, Yugito let the music sink in for a moment to calm her nerves. This was going to be a long day. Where was she going to begin? Do we have to go there again? Yugito complained as she walked out of the office with Naruto while trying to stifle a yawn as she had to wait an entire hour for Naruto to get out of his session. Yes, we do, even if it is going to be a pain in the ass. Naruto retorted before dropping his head and sighing. At least they are only trying to help you recover. They are basically trying to dissect me and figure out what the hell happened and why my darker emotions are more pronounced. You matured under stress. Isn't that enough for them? Yugito responded as she tilted her head, trying to understand what Naruto meant by that. Sure, he was a little childish and carefree when they met, but she doubted that was what they were after. Naruto nodded, wishing that was the case before shaking his head. It is to an extent. I think what they are worried about is that my darker emotions that I used to keep entirely separate from my being are surfacing. They fear that Dark is trying to take over. Yugito shivered, remembering Dark having been released during his training with Itachi before they raided the Akatsuki base. He won't, not with me around. Itachi said so himself, he can't come out as there is something about me that repels him. That's why Conan started training me alongside of Itachi training you, remember? Nodding as he remembered that, Naruto flicked his hand through his hair before frowning as it was becoming too long for him. Yeah, but they don't know that yet. They're going to go through a few things first before they start really treating us, getting a feel for how much we can handle at a time. It wouldn't be good if we had a nervous meltdown and started destroying everything around us. Seeing that we are probably the strongest in the village now. Oh goody, we get to relive that crap again. Yugito bitterly stated before stopping and turning around as she sensed someone was following them at a distance but closing. What do you want? Having sensed her as well, Naruto sighed as he turned around to see it was indeed Hinata again. She had only stayed at Yoshino's office for a moment before leaving, probably realizing that she could be sensed and knowing her Byukugen could spy upon them from a distance. In truth, he honestly wasn't ready to deal with her yet as Yugito wasn't strong enough mentally to do so. He knew if he was around her too long Dark would begin to emerge, and after Itachi released him, he didn't want him to come out again as he could do serious damage with Hireishin. To his luck, it seemed that a few of his friends were also hanging around the area. He could get Ino, Choji and Shikamaru as they knew exactly how long Yoshino's counseling sessions lasted and they probably wanted to meet up with him. Shino on the other hand, was probably there for Hinata. Just glancing in his direction, Shino seemed to get the message immediately and appeared by Hinata. From the look in Naruto's eyes, he knew the blonde wasn't ready to deal with her just yet. He had let her check on Naruto earlier, but immediately had taken her away, but she ended back here again. Hinata, let's go. Kurenai wants to see you now. Hinata looked over at Naruto for a moment before nodding and headed to Yoshino's office, knowing that was where Kurenai would be. Shino stayed behind for a moment before bowing lightly to Naruto and receiving one in return. Immediately afterwards he followed Hinata to make sure she wouldn't take any detours. Okay, I'm not even going to ask. Shikamaru said as he walked over to Naruto before shaking his head, thinking it was too troublesome to do so. Slightly annoyed that so many people suddenly arrived, as if they knew exactly when to strike, Yugito twitched and was ready to say something when Naruto cut her off. I'm guessing you three are here to take us to get lunch? If so, make it somewhere that serves tekkadon that isn't too spicy. Sure thing, I know this restaurant that serves some mean tuna tekkadon, though you will have to ask to hold the heat. Choji announced excitedly as if his friend wanted to try something different. He wanted to make sure he got the best the town had to offer. It's not for me, Choji. Naruto said before he tilted his head into Yugito's direction, who had now been intrigued as she absolutely loved the dish and wondered how good it actually tasted. Yugito absolutely adores it as much as I do Ichiraku's ramen. Ah, alright then. They serve a lot of great food, so let's go. Choji commented before leading the way as he knew where the restaurant was, smirking all the way as this would be a big surprise for Naruto. Surprisingly enough, Yugito was following him in hot pursuit as she had deemed that any place that sells her favorite dish was worth going to at least once. The rest simply followed, Naruto and Shikamaru shaking their heads. Listen, Naruto. Shikamaru tried to start, wanting to talk about their nominations to become the next Hokage. Shikamaru, drop it. I know the title really doesn't appeal to you as it does to me, but you were chosen as a successor due to your intelligence, set of skills, and because you are frankly one of the best shinobi in the village, otherwise you wouldn't even be considered. The hag recognized that and nominated you. Naruto interrupted as he pocketed his hands into his jacket sleeves. Nodding, Shikamaru sighed before doing the same with his flak jacket. Yeah, I get that. But the thing is, Naruto, no one deserves that title more than you do, especially if you took down the entire Akatsuki with only 3 other S-rank ninja, 2 being from the Akatsuki. To be honest, I feel I was nominated not to motivate you to make you work hard, but to be the Hokage if you were not mentally stable to hold the title. I had a feeling that was why you were nominated, as Dad was the only one nominated for his position as there was no real competition, neither Danzo nor Orochimaru being close in skills. I hate to say that I'm on the same level as he is, but after the horror I just had to go through, She has to be sure I won't break from the stress. Naruto responded before smiling as they arrived at the restaurant and reading the name. His next reaction was comical as his eyes became bug-eyed while his jaw slacked. Wait, Choji owns this place? And he bought out Ichiraku's? No, my dad does, and Tucci is part owner, getting half the profit, which is almost triple to what they got before you left. Which mostly was Iruka and you, strangely enough. They opened this while you were gone and it has become one of the best places to eat in Konoha. Most of the time people need reservations to get in, Choji proudly stated before he led them to the table next to the bar, which was eerily empty as they were probably saving it for them. Moments after they sat down, Choji's mother was quickly at their table while Shuza was in the kitchen. Well, hello my darling. Glad to see you brought everyone, including our future Hokages. Now what may I get you? Great, does everyone already know that we are the Hag's successors? Naruto complained as he laid back in his chair, Yugito patting him on the back knowing he was frustrated. Normally, no one other than those close would know. However, Lady Tsunade has gone through great lengths to make sure it is known that you are her successor. I think she wants to make a point to the entire village due to your furry situation. Only those that are close to me know I'm in the running. Shikamaru informed Naruto before ordering a small plate of sushi. Ordering the Caesar salad, Ino nodded in agreement before adding on. Yeah, I believe that is what she is aiming to do. However, I think it is more because people still think of you as the demon, and if they still won't change their minds she'll force their hands. Ino, you didn't know I was Kyuubi's vessel till yesterday. How would you know that? Naruto asked before ordering half a dozen bowls of various different ramen, all from the oddly named Naruto special, which was more than likely a Yame and Tucci's idea. Yeah, but it didn't take me long to figure that out. Plus it really helps when you listen to Sakura, Shikamaru and Shino debate over the subject. Ino added, feeling a little sheepish she couldn't take full credit. After Choji ordered a dozen plates of the mixed special, Yugito looked at the menu for a moment before ordering. I would like a plate of each the salmon and tuna tekkadon, but don't make it spicy. I also would like some sauerkraut and a thing of pickles on the side and a bowl of vanilla ice cream with chopped up bits of chocolate in it. Oh, and a big glass of that fizzy drink. What's the name again? Cola, Naruto said as he shook his head at her odd order, though it wasn't anything really different as they had been eating out in villages while on their way back. He still found it a little odd compared to what she ordered before, but he thought it to be a coping mechanism. However, Mrs. Akamichi nearly doubled over hearing her order before looking at her with a raised eyebrow, only getting orders like that every once in a while. Smiling as she guessed the girl obviously knew her condition, she nodded as she wrote the order. Oh, eating for two are we? Well, I'll go tell Shuza and Tucci the orders. As she walked off, Yugito blinked as she watched her retreating form. What did that mean? I'm eating my food, so who is she talking about? Ino and Shikamaru's face fell as they looked at the other blonde-haired Kunoichi. They immediately understood what Mrs. Akamichi was hinting at. So that meant that she didn't know? They had to stop at other places to get checked out after they fought the Akatsuki, as the demons couldn't heal them that well, could they? Muttering troublesome under his breath over and over again, Shikamaru was about to rest his head and get some sleep before Ino spoke, deciding to ignore the subject. Wow, I never seen another girl order that much before. Most of the girls I know order small salads with almost no calories. I eat a lot to maintain my weight as I have a high metabolism and burn through energy like a shrew, as does Naruto if you haven't noticed. Yugito explained as she put the menu down, as she would wait and see if she was still hungry after she ate. Besides, not eating very much is a bad thing. If you barely eat anything each day, your body begins to use its own stores of energy, breaking down fat, muscles and even organs to give itself the energy it needs. I hate most kunoichi that try to diet to keep their form slim, as they are not only hurting themselves but the name of kunoichi as well. She added on, giving health tips to Ino as she had a feeling Ino was dieting. Trying to find a point to counter that, Ino really couldn't, as Yugito was right. Besides, she ate a big breakfast every day to last her through most of the day and only ate small portions of food for lunch and dinner. It's good to hear others know that. My family has been trying to teach that for years, but many of the young generation don't listen. Choji said as a Yame came by with their drinks and Ino's salad with a smile brighter than anyone could remember. Naruto, it is good to see you again. Both Dad and I thought we might never see you again. Ayame chirped as she handed everyone their drink. Oh, this must be the girl I've heard about. Hello, I'm Ayame, Naruto's sister as he calls me. Feeling slightly less threatened by the girl hearing that, Yugito accepted her drink before nodding. She still wasn't very comfortable speaking with her though. Yugito, glad to meet you. Seeing her slight discomfort, Naruto shook his head before wrapping his arm around her waist as he spoke to Ayame. Yeah, I've had many people say that already. So how is the old man doing? Dad is doing great, especially now as he doesn't have as much to worry about thanks to Mr. Akamichi. After you left we almost became broke and he said he would buy the shop if we let him add onto our menu and become co-owner. And so far it has been a huge success. Ayame chirped before snapping her fingers as she heard a ring. Shoot, I got to get back to work. Talk to you later. As Ayame left, Yugito simply turned to Naruto and gave him an annoyed glare as that caught her completely off guard. Any more people like her you want to tell me about? I think she would be the last one other than her dad. Yakumo maybe, but we probably won't run into her for a while. You've already seen the rest of my friends, so it shouldn't be much of an issue. Naruto said, forgetting to inform Yugito on his relationship with Ayame and Tuchi. Forgiving him as it wasn't anything deep, Yugito leaned her head onto Naruto's shoulder before closing her eyes as she felt comfortable with Naruto there. Wake me when the food gets here. I'm still very tired. No problem, babe. Naruto responded as he held her close to him before kissing her on the top of her head. Within a few moments she was asleep, making Naruto chuckle at her. Ino sighed before shaking her head, wishing she had that kind of relationship. Man, and here I thought I would be one of the first in our generation to get married. Of course I thought it was going to be with Sasuke for the longest time, but still. Things change and you can't predict what's going to happen. For all we know, Shikamaru here could get married to the crazy purple-haired chick tomorrow and beat Yugito and me to the punch. Naruto stated before smirking as he looked over at Shikamaru. Shikamaru's head immediately snapped forward as he glared at Naruto. Don't joke about that. That woman would tear me to shreds for being as lazy as I am. I know I'm more than likely to marry a troublesome woman, but I don't think I could survive long with her. I rather take Ino. Am I too troublesome for you? Ino suddenly stated with an evil glint in her eyes which made Shikamaru's face squint in frustration. He knew this was going to cause him problems for a while, so his best course of action was to change the subject and avoid the eventually pain for a while. Naruto, I don't think Lady Tsunade has informed you yet, but tonight she wanted to give us some sort of test. Yeah, she told me right after I got out of counseling. That's why after I eat here I'm going to take Yugito home and take a nap. I'm still very tired as well. Now back to Ino's question. Is she too troublesome for you? Naruto informed Shikamaru before grinning as he pulled Ino back into the conversation. Just glaring at him for doing that, Shikamaru planned on making Naruto's night a living hell. He was trying to avoid Ino as he had to say just a few more words than he meant. I'm glad you are on time. Tsunade stated as Naruto and Yugito walked into the training grounds she had specified to Naruto after his counseling session. It is good to see you are more dependable than all of your senseis. Yeah, I learned not to follow their examples, at least on a few things. Some things were just impossible not to follow. Naruto responded before scratching his head and laughing a bit, knowing both were very perverted. Yugito shook her head as Shikamaru sighed and muttered troublesome as he arrived 10 minutes before. Twitching her eye at his response, Tsunade refraining from groaning as she had a good idea at what he was talking about. That goddamn perverts. I make sure they all rot in hell. Hey, I'm perverted. Yugito commented very loudly, making Naruto literally taste the ground as he hadn't expected her to shout that out loud. Neither did Shikamaru as he choked on his own spit while Tsunade just looked at her with a raised eyebrow before sighing. Okay then, let's make this clear. Any pervert that openly reads smut in front of people or peeps on the opposite gender while they are vulnerable should burn in hell. Well, I guess we aren't going to get along. One of the things that I enjoyed to do back in the cloud was using my stealth to sneak in and watch the guys bathing in the hot springs. That's how I actually met Naruto. As he kind of spotted me, used to Jiraiya doing the same thing. Yugito stated before admitting the last fact. Naruto's face further buried itself into the dirt, trying to make his own grave as he didn't want people to know that, let alone Tsunade. She would literally just tear her apart for that, as she hated perverts with a passion. Shizune, who was with Tsunade and hadn't said a word, blinked for a moment before shaking her head. Lose one perverted peeper and gain another. However, I doubt the guys will mind too much. I would. Naruto yelled out from the dirt before he simply glared at his fiancée, daring her to do so while she was here. Yugito simply shook her head before offering Naruto her hand, smiling softly. Don't worry, I doubt I'll ever want to do that again. In an instant Yugito's demeanor turned and her face saddened, and she almost cringed when Naruto took her hand. She, however, remained strong as she brought him to her feet before he embraced her, knowing where her thoughts had led her. After a moment, she felt a little better before she separated from the blonde. I believe you called my fiancé here for a reason. So can we get on with it? Seeing how Naruto handled Yugito, Tsunade nodded before she gazed over to Shizune, who immediately understood as she was brought here for that reason. Yes, that would be for the best. Naruto, Shikamaru, as both of you know, from now on you will be coming with me to the council meetings, which thankfully only happen once a week. Outside of those meetings you will have meetings with the clan heads and Junin at times they specify, so don't be surprised if you are informed of a meeting at 5 in the morning. God, I hate those the most. And finally, you are still expected to train and improve your skills and to acquire skills you did not previously have before. Tsunade added on as she looked over towards Naruto and Shikamaru. For this, I have assigned trainers for both of you around this time every night, so you will not have any meetings at this time of night. On each day, there will be a Junin helping you to train in one of your weakness. However, on this day every week both of you will spar against me. And seeing this is my day, I'll give you a few moments to prepare yourselves. Tsunade finished with a grin on her face as she cracked her knuckles. Neither Naruto nor Shikamaru liked this idea. They didn't like it at all. As it was night, it did give Shikamaru an advantage due to the shadows, but could he really restrain the Hokage? Maybe for a few moments before she literally overpowered him, and then what? Kiss his ass goodbye? Naruto believed this was just a way to let out her pent-up frustration through a combination of things, one being he was gone for 4 years. He had a feeling Yugito would be visiting him in the hospital daily for the next month. Yugito simply stood back and joined Shizune, who was beckoning to her. She would go see what the calm nurse wanted, as she had a feeling she was about to see why Tsunade was looked up onto by many kunoichi and considered the strongest. Naruto, I'm going over here, don't die. Twitching his eyes at Yugito's obvious lack of faith in him, not that it was unjustified, Naruto groaned. He had beaten Madara for crying out loud. How tough could Tsunade be compared to him? Begin! Tsunade yelled out, not giving the boys any time to comprehend that the spar had begun as she launched a giant chunk of earth towards Naruto's face. Moments later, Naruto was lying flat on the ground with birds and stars swirling around his head. His question had been answered. She would be very tough. Shikamaru simply cursed and rolled away as he noted Naruto seemed to have been rocked from the blow. Not that he could blame him. Tsunade was the strongest person in the world in pure strength, and add that with her ability to heal, her impressive speed, intelligence and chakra control. She was a literal nightmare to even think about fighting. In fact, every strategy he had couldn't even come close to beating her. In fact, they all ended with the same result. He would die in some horrible fashion, like being crushed by a mountain or her foot crushing his crown jewels. Shaking his head and standing up, Naruto dusted himself off as he quickly recovered from the blow. Okay, I deserved that for many reasons and I wasn't paying attention. I'll take this more serious now. Good, Tsunade yelled out as she was suddenly in front of Naruto with her fist flying to his face. She wouldn't worry about Shikamaru at the moment. The boy was trying to calculate and come up with a strategy that would work against her in 2-on-1 and possibly 1-on-1. A daunting task for anyone, much less for a young kid that was beginning to take his training seriously. Naruto, however, immediately ducked under her punch. Using her momentum, Tsunade spun and kicked, air. Almost losing her balance, she landed in a crouch and half expected Naruto to have used Flying Thunder God to have gotten out of the way, only to feel that he was behind her. While it definitely could be the flash, she saw no evidence of it being used. The kunai wasn't in place, there wasn't a marker, and there was definitely no flash. So, was this his true speed? While that alarmed her, she ducked and rolled away from the axe kick that came down and would have caused her a great deal of pain seeing his foot sink into the ground. If he had become that fast in 4 years. He truly was his father's child, as Minato was the faster ninja she had ever seen, being matched by no one. Regaining her composure, she made sure there was no signs of the speed jutsu. Tsunade was not amused. She hated fighting fast opponents as they tended to wear her down before she could get a blow on them. And to make things worse, this was Naruto. He was already known for his extreme stamina and endurance. And if his strength considerably grew too. Tsunade cursed both Jiraiya and Itachi to hell. Adding those two elements to Naruto not only made him one formidable hand-to-hand fighter but helped establish openings for his already impressive ninjutsu and now apparently genjutsu. Goddamn Itachi. Goddamn Jiraiya. They built a freaking and ultra-fast invisible bullet tank. Good thing she forbade both Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi against Konoha ninja. Feeling her entire body suddenly stop moving, Tsunade's eyes widened. This was not the time for Shikamaru to get involved. To make things worse, Naruto had set up her jump back with a powerful burst of flame, probably Grand Fireball, but the name didn't really matter. It was a huge firefuck ball. Using her precision chakra control and her formidable strength, she easily burst out of Shikamaru's shadows before jumping above the flames and straight towards Naruto. The good thing was that Naruto had to stop the flames without hurting himself before he could move to dodge her, so he was wide open for an attack. Then she realized. Clones. Naruto was famous for them and she had forgotten that was his favorite jutsu. So she was half expecting one to pop out and catch her off guard only for there to be none. Then she saw why. Shikamaru had set up a damn trap and the wires wrapped around her tightly. While they were easy for her to break, they served their purpose as Naruto was easily able to avoid Tsunade and quickly get behind her, not wanting to take a chance and fighting her toe-to-toe. Getting annoyed, Tsunade spun around and tried to hit Naruto in the chin with an elbow but failed as the blonde vanished into thin air. Even Tsunade was surprised by this kind of speed as she could at least catch Minato's movements, more like blurs, before he hit top speed and vanished. Somehow Naruto was able to hit top speed in a blink and avoid being seen altogether. Being knocked back from a blow to the stomach, she felt restrained from the shadows again and began to deal with the shadow hand crawling over her body to choke her and the tendrils trying to pierce her. Under normal circumstances that scenario would have been something straight from Jiraiya's fantasies, but she simply cursed him once more. Breaking free and feeling like she needed a shower as Jiraiya somehow entered her own mind for a second, Tsunade wanted to end this. So she was going to do it the only way she knew how. She was going to take Shikamaru out first as Naruto would take far longer to take out, if she could take him down. Shikamaru didn't know what hit him. Whatever it was felt like it crushed every bone in his body. Then he realized it had to be Tsunade's fist. Apparently they got her worked up and now she was fighting at her full potential. As he watched Shikamaru go down and not come up, Naruto knew they pissed Tsunade off. He hadn't seen her move that fast even after watching her chase after Jiraiya when he peeped on her, then somehow removed both her and Shizun's towel. And he still swore to this day she must have been using some sort of space-time jutsu. Using his speed, Naruto spent the next few moments avoiding Tsunade's punches and kicks before getting behind her to try and deliver an attack of his own. That only worked shortly as Tsunade came to expect them and began to prepare counters for them, his speed being the only thing that kept him from getting sent into oblivion. In fact, that was the way the battle was shaping out. His speed versus her strength. Neither was able to get a hit on the other, Naruto because of a dreadful counterattack and Tsunade as Naruto was simply too quick. Sure, he had used a few jutsu but she easily blocked those or avoided them. Tsunade now understood how Naruto was able to defeat Kakuzu, Sasori and Madara. His speed alone gave him the edge, but she could feel that he wasn't unleashing his truly devastating jutsu. In fact, she hadn't even seen him use Shadow Clone or the Rasengan the entire time, and that was frustrating to know. He had to know if he used Shadow Clone that he would easily be able to overwhelm her and inflict enough damage to end the fight. But what was scary was that she knew that he held the Toad contract. And she knew what was special about signing it. The Toads trained their summoners in the art of Sage Chakra and she had a good feeling Naruto could draw onto that. Then there was the Sharingan, which he hadn't even activated yet. Those things were just an unfair advantage on their own, and then add in the Mangekyo and he was truly a powerful foe. However, she at least wanted to see him unleash one technique. She could freaking take it. She was one of the strongest in the world, especially if the Akatsuki was dead. Gathering a large portion of chakra in her hands, Tsunade hoped that she wouldn't accidentally kill the blonde with this technique. She had only used it twice before, as it took a large portion of her chakra on her head to use and drained her of a lot of her physical strength. One of those times happened to be the night she had it in her mind she was going to kill Jiraiya and when she attempted to kill Orochimaru. Sensing this, Naruto knew she was up to something and he had to stop her. Whatever it was going to be big. As he went in to divert her attention, he forgot one big thing. Tsunade was a close-range fighter and not so adept at fighting at a distance, and he played right into her hand. Smirking as she sensed him coming in, Tsunade suddenly whirled around and pointed her hands glowing with chakra towards Naruto. Gotcha. The resulting bang made it hard for anyone to see what happened. Of course there was many people there, wanting to see Naruto's skills along with those just wanting to see a good fight. But what happened next no one expected. As the dust began to settle, Tsunade saw Naruto lying on the ground, blood seemingly pouring from his mouth. Her eyes widened. She had expected him to use something to block it. Even if it was just a Rasengan, it would have been effective enough to at least divert the blow. But he had just stood there and took it. Her eyes suddenly widened as Naruto smirked before he slowly stood up, shaking along the way. I've been wanting to test this ever since getting his eyes. Now I can see why he called this his ultimate shield. I didn't feel a thing. Tsunade's eyes widened as an ethereal glow began to surround Naruto. At first it seemed to be nothing but energy, but it slowly warped into a humanoid shape completed with bones. Then with one word, her entire body shivered as she looked up into the now formed head of a samurai. Susanoo. Naruto, release it. The longer you hold it the more damage it causes. Yugito screamed as she jumped into the fray, blue chakra flaring around her as she had begun to draw upon Nibi's chakra to make a point. Nodding, the ethereal warrior vanished before Naruto fell to his knees and wiped the blood from his chin. Yeah, I can feel it. It seems all the Mangekyou's attacks have a price for using them. But at least I can still see. He tried to be enthusiastic about the situation despite his appearance from the attack. Fuck you, Blondie. I have to heal this damage, you asshole. Do you like to keep setting me back on recovering your damned eyesight to its fullest? Kyuubi yelled at her idiotic vessel, not taking the damn Uchiha on his word that it caused massive internal bleeding, which she now was attempting to heal. Naruto, that was stupid. Don't use it unless you have to. Even the Rasen Shuriken is safer than it. And that's not safe at all. If you hadn't learned how to throw it you would have ripped your arm off in the process of using it. Yugito condemned his use of the Susanoo and apparently a Rasengan-based attack he had created. Recovering Tsunade was next to Naruto, checking his wounds. The next moment she wanted to rip his head off, but she kept her calm demeanor as she began to help the demon fox out. Goddammit, do you not have jutsu in your arsenal that doesn't cause you massive damage? Plenty, but you would know of them and I saw it in your eyes. You wanted to see one of the jutsu I was holding back. So I used a jutsu I had no clue what it did entirely. Now I know and don't plan on using it again unless I absolutely have to. Naruto responded with a sly grin on his face before taking it away immediately from the look on both the blondes' faces. Fine, I won't use it again. Naruto muttered, not wanting to cave in but having no choice as they could withhold things. Tsunade would be treatments and Yugito. Well, what she could withhold is quite obvious. They're cuddling while listening to music time. There was nothing he could do. This foe was simply too powerful for him to match. Every single thing he did meant nothing as it simply passed through him. And if it didn't pass through him, he received a vicious counterattack that left her momentarily stunned. And even with the hits he got, he wasn't doing enough damage to hurt him. Give up yet? I've already explained to you why you cannot win. Madara's voice echoed through the room, sounding more childish than it did before. Straining every muscle in his body, he pushed his bloodied and beaten body. His right eye had literally popped from the damage he had sustained and blood was nearly flooding down his body from the empty socket. Fuck you, I don't surrender. In a flicker of yellow light, he slashed through Madara's body only to see he had phased out of existence before appearing again to deliver a devastating blow to his stomach with a kunai. Foolish child. I will extract the 9 tails from you and the 2 tails from you girlfriend over there. My dream will come true. Coughing blood, he managed to get a lucky elbow into Tomadara's face, cracking the mask, before jumping back and panting. He wouldn't make it for much longer. This fight had drained almost everything he had except for his chakra, which was still coming thanks to Kyuubi replenishing his chakra throughout the battle. A sudden scream caught his attention before his eyes widened, seeing the other blonde in the room slicing downwards with a kunai. Yugito, no. Blood splattered onto the ground before her hand dropped to the ground. He could tell it caused her a tremendous amount of pain, but the look in her eye told him something else. They had one last attempt to stop him as grabbed the key and opened the shackle. Do it now. Flashing before Madara, he grabbed a hold of his cloak before flashing before the statue, right next to the shackle. Before he could phase out of existence, Yugito snapped the shackle onto his arm before throwing the key away before picking up her served hand, hoping she could reattach it. Growling, an orb of chakra began to form in his hands as Madara struggled against the chain. He had said it himself, no one could break that chain thanks to the seals it had been given. The only way to get out was to sever your own limb, and he wasn't going to give him that time. Adding his element nature to his most trusted attack, it began to become misshapen as 4 separate points surrounded it. Yugito seemed to know what was about to happen and had gotten out of the way as he screamed out, feeling his attack was finished, and drove it towards Madara's throat, releasing it a foot before it made contact. Go to hell, you fucker. Rasenshuriken. In a blur of powerful cutting winds and chakra tearing away at his enemy and his own body, his arm being decimated while his vision suddenly darkened as a blade of wind hit his other eye. He awoke. Looking around the room in a panic, Naruto began to calm down before a small purr caught attention. Looking to his side, his panic began to lessen as Yugito slept soundly besides him. That hell was over. Now they could start their life again. This is why I hate the hospital. It's lifeless. Naruto commented loudly as he wanted to leave his room and do something. Anything. He was slowly losing his fragile little mind in this room. Yugito smiled and nodded as nuzzled him gently as she laid beside him, not caring what Tsunade had told her, and slept by her fiancé the night before. Without him besides her, she couldn't go to sleep, nor could Naruto sleep without her. It was something that they just needed. I know, but at least Sakura was kind enough to bring us a CD player. Nodding as he listened to the music through the earbud he was wearing, Naruto nuzzled her back before putting his arm around her waist. Yeah, that will kill some of the boredom. Ehem, didn't I tell both of you that only one is allowed on the bed? Tsunade's voice boomed as she entered the room, her eyebrows twitching as it seemed that both were disobedient, at least in that department. Naruto simply rolled his eyes at the Hokage before ignoring her as he closed his eyes and held Yugito closer to him. Yugito giggled before wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Tsunade was both very ecstatic and upset at what she was seeing. Obviously she was happy to see that Naruto had found someone he loved and loved him back, but she was seething that both completely ignored her despite telling them that Naruto need room to rest so his body would heal properly. Okay, fuck it, Tsunade said, through with trying to pry through the two. That wasn't going to work, and she had an idea that some very deep bonds were forged on their passage to the leaf. Whenever you are done sucking faces, I need to see you for a checkup and to see what we can do about your hand, Yugito. It didn't take a moment for Yugito to sit up and grip her slightly withered hand. While the blood was flowing, it wouldn't be long before those veins burst and the blood stopped altogether and the hand withered to dust. She didn't want that. As for a ninja, the hands were very important. Feeling Naruto hug her from behind, Yugito leaned back against him before slowly prying out of his grip. Don't worry, I won't be gone too long. Smiling as he nodded and let her leave, she turned to follow Tsunade as they exited the room. It was quite odd to see someone navigate the maze of the hospital so easily, but if there was anyone that could, she would be the one. Arriving in a room that seemed a little livelier than Naruto's, she figured this was Tsunade's office in the hospital. Sit on the table. I'm going to run over a few things before I try and mend the veins in your hand. I have one question though, does your demon heal you like Kyuubi does for Naruto? Tsunade ordered as she pulled out a few scrolls and looked over them for a moment before nodding. Doing as she was told, Yugito sat on the table. It was colder than what she would have liked and uncomfortable, but visits with medics weren't exactly comfortable anyways. No, Naruto can heal far more rapidly when using her chakra, no matter how severe the wound. However, our healing is about the same overnight and neither of the demons allow us to get any diseases or cancers. Good, good. I'm glad I don't have to test you for breast cancer then. Tsunade commented before activating a simply diagnosis scan. Please remain still as possible while I look over you. Okay, Yugito said as she tried to keep her body as still as possible as Tsunade slowly moved her hand from the tip of her head down to her toes. It was really hard to do so and she fidgeted quite often, especially when Tsunade wavered in certain areas longer than others. She also didn't like how much time she had spent around her pelvis. Was there damages that she didn't know of? She would know if she had gotten pregnant by those assholes, as it was well over 9 months since that happened. But it wasn't until recently she and Naruto. Alright, everything seems to be fine outside of your hand. Just let me go over the scrolls a little longer to make sure I have this right and I'll get to it. Tsunade stated before marching over to her scrolls to scan over them. As she watched Tsunade move over and read the scrolls, so many ideas began to hit her, but the most prominent was she was pregnant. That would explain some of the things that had been said to her recently and why for the second time Tsunade hesitated around her womb. But why wouldn't Nibi tell her that she was pregnant? The demon knew what was going on in her body, and if he hadn't said something, that meant there was nothing to be talked about. But why was she hesitating there? Almost not noticing Tsunade as she walked back over to her, Yugito was slightly taken back from her order. Lie on your stomach and place your hand on the stretcher. Before I start, this will be painful. Do you need? I can handle it. I cut it off, didn't I? Yugito responded, almost angrily, as she was very unsure what was going on when the medic hovered at her pelvic region. Nodding, guessing she was tensing and getting ready for the pain, Tsunade's hands glowed with chakra before the guided over the badly stitched hand. Yugito nearly screamed from the sudden pain. It was far worse than she had imagined it would be. While it wasn't as bad as severing her hand, it was like 1,000 white-hot needles were poking and prodding her skin, fat, muscles and veins, while slowly correctly what the fox and cat had done. Writhing in pain, she willed her body to stay still as Tsunade began to sweat as she concentrated on reconnecting the muscles with the correct muscles, then doing the same for the veins and even the bone as it was slightly askew. Pulling her hands away, Tsunade smiled as she had successfully regenerated the missing connections and had attached them, saving Yugito's hand. The fact that Yugito looked like she cut off her hand again didn't really surprise her. She was just surprised that she was able to not squirm from such pain. Beginning to bandage her hand slowly, Tsunade couldn't help but smile a little more as she thought about what she saw before when she scanned her. Well, now that your hand is working how it should, there shouldn't be any more problems. But I don't want you using this hand for a month at least for anything more than small movements. Why did you hover at my womb? You did it today and you did it when you first scanned me. I want to know what's up, as neither you or Nibi is telling me. Yugito suddenly asked, nearly blindsiding the Hokage. Sputtering, Tsunade wasn't sure how to say it. It was obvious that the girl had been pregnant for almost 2 months from what she knew of baby development and wasn't at the weight she had said she was. It was only 10 pounds, but still. Guessing that she honestly didn't know and didn't really notice the changes in her body much as her stomach wasn't bulging yet as it only had started to expand, Tsunade sighed. I figured you knew already, but I guess I'm the one that has to tell you. Yugito, you're pregnant. Reality stopped at that exact moment. She was pregnant. Yugito wasn't sure what to think. One part of her was absolute thrilled as she wanted to get involved with someone over the years and eventually have a kid of her own. But now, after what Kurabi had done to her, it was a numb shock. But then she thought of what Naruto would say. Her mood began to brighten. He would be thrilled and that alone made her happy. But he would also be worried, but then again he already was watching over her like a hawk. It was a little unnerving, but welcomed after everything they had gone through. He would eventually lighten up again, but that would be a while now. How long, and can you tell if it is a boy or girl? Yugito asked. Her voice was a little shaky, yet a small ting of excitement laced it as one of her dreams was finally coming true. Tsunade smiled before patting the girl on the back. She knew some of her unease was from her rate, but she could see it was her excitement that was causing her to be so shaky. There was no doubt it caused her trauma, but to keep the want to have children afterwards was simply amazing. It is twins and I'm unsure now what gender they are, but I'm pretty sure one was a boy from the angle. But I won't be able to tell for sure until you are a few months further in. Tsunade stated. The next thing she knew, she was hugged before Yugito sped out of her office. Chuckling, the buxom blonde placed her hands on her hip and watched her run off, not even sure where she was going. That girl is stronger than I would be if I went through what she has. And she couldn't pick someone that is more like her and the little idiot. Naruto was having a nice conversation with Sakura and Shizune as both came in to check on him and decided to chat for a little while. So naturally they ended up talking about Iruka as Naruto wanted to figure out how he became an Anbu while he was gone. You're kidding me, right? There is no way. Yes way, Naruto. Iruka is head over heels in love with her. I don't see why, but he is. Sakura excitedly responded as she loved chatting with her friends. It was also a very good way to get Naruto caught up with everyone. Oh, I know why he is. Anko may look boisterous, tough and rebellious, but that's her facade so she can hide her real self. She is actually as unsure of herself, very loyal and meek, and Iruka is able to make her feel more like her mask as he gives her confidence. Shizune added as she knew both quite well, Anko being one of her better friends since returning to Konoha. Shaking his head, Naruto shrugged his shoulders. Still can't believe it. Before he could say something else, the door slammed open with Yugito looking like she was very ecstatic. Whoa, Yugito, what's going? I'm pregnant with twins. Yugito screamed out, not caring who heard as she jumped onto him and almost choked him with her hug as she attempted to meld into Naruto. Naruto looked like a deer caught in the headlights. He had no clue what to say or how to react. The main reason of this was because the way Yugito was reacting as it was throwing him completely off. He honestly didn't think that she could have been. But it was possible. But why was she acting like this instead of freaking? Well, she was freaking out. With a click of the door, Sakura and Shizune knew it was better to leave the couple alone for now. Besides, they had to spread the news. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.